PlayStation players can now Hi-Fi Rush to get the platinum. Hello and welcome to Triangle Square to PlayStation Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Beck, and alongside me, back in his rightful throne, in his rightful spot this week, is one Mr. Chris Figs. Chris, how you doing this week? You better?
No, actually, ironically, because I got sick, and now I have gout again. So,
Jesus fucking Christ, Chris.
Yeah, it's not great. It's all falling apart around me. It's really fun.
Well, I feel for you. I just don't know what to do. So, I feel for you, and I wish you the best of luck in figuring this out. This out, and just good luck on your journey.
Thank you. I'm living my truth with my feet now, and it's not.
There you have it. Well, Chris, as you may have known if you watched last week, was not able to be with us, like he said, but we did get to I got to sit down and have a good discussion with Joseph Moran from the Trophy Room PlayStation Podcast. So if you haven't checked that out, I urge you to go back and check it out. I know Chris tends to listen to the episodes, and I know from a few conversations I had with Chris that he did listen to the episode. So very thankful that he was able to step in short notice and help out with the show. It was a great time. I had a good time doing it. But Chris, you're back. And that means that we get to have our standard, here we are. Let's get the chaos unrolling and unfolding.
So 51st dates.
Did you watch it? That was my very first question. So
no,
what people may not know, we talked about 51st dates in the last episode Chris was on.
Yep.
And like 2 days later in the Discord, Chris works at a place that does movies. So there's a theater thing. Yep. And he sends a picture saying, guys, I had no clue this was coming, but our theater does like older movies that they screen periodically, and this week's is 51st Dates.
Yeah.
That feels like fate. That was the tapestry.
It was one of the times where I was walking and I had to just like, and then take a couple steps back and just be like, what the fuck is going on? But I will say, now that I've stared at that movie poster for 40 hours a week, she's fucking terrified. The movie is fucking rapey. I'm dead ass. If you pull up the poster on your computer right now, everyone listening, I'll give you a minute. Okay? Pull it up. Drew Barrymore looks fucking terrified.
In the poster?
In the poster.
Oh, she does. She looks like a deer in the headlights.
Terrified.
While you have Adam Sandler being like, do you like my ukulele?
He's doing the scene from Barbie where they're all just singing that song.
Chris, I already agreed with you, and yet you've still given me a new way to look at this.
Yeah. I'm sorry if you like that movie, but
Hey, look, if you like the movie, have at it.
The movie implies that it's a good thing. So, if you want to listen to the Weinsteins or whoever made that movie, that's up to you.
Well, Chris, we are going to get around to a couple things, of course. This is not the craziest news week. A couple of things did happen right before recording. One big thing in particular that I've made sure to add to the news. So we're going to get to talking about the PlayStation Plus games for Extra and Premium for the month. We're going to talk about the community's take, where we check in and see what you guys think of the future of PlayStation and where we might see them go if they're going to take a drastic turn. We're going to talk about some PSP classics that are part of the PlayStation Plus games, and if that's indicative of anything else coming. Some demos for some games like Sandland is one coming out. PlayStation coming back into digital codes, PS5 Pro specs, and if they're real, and kind of have a little discussion about, does the power matter? How much does it matter? Where's a reasonable line? And some questions that we had some listeners ask around that. And, of course, some bad news for PSVR 2. But before we do so, we're going to hop into the way we always start the show, where we check in on what each of us have been playing so that we can give you, the listener, maybe something to look forward to and hop onto as your next game. Give you insight on something that we're playing that you might be playing as well, or steer you away from something that our comments make you realize may not be your speed. So, Chris, you were out. I'm going to throw the ball over to you as I usually always do. But, have at it. You're going to give us your list of games you played the entire, 2-week break that you had, or are you going to
Yeah, no, I'll give you the entire list of games that I played for the 2 weeks.
Because it's two games.
Unicorn Overlord is what I played for 2 weeks.
Okay, look, don't lie, Chris. We both know that you simp for MLB. So what's up?
Sure.
Where's the show in this?
I've played the show, but I've definitely played a lot less of the show than I would have expected at this point.
Did the Japanese win you over?
They did, yes. Yeah.
Wow.
I think I've played like 5 hours of the show, and I've played 50 hours of Unicorn Overlord. So
that's way off kilter for you.
Yeah.
But that points to a solid foundation for Unicorn Overlord. I've not played it yet. I know it's vanillaware. I know everybody loves them from things like Dragon Crown. Did they do Odin Sphere? Something like that?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I thought so.
Muramasa.
I am aware of them. That's right, Muramasa Rebirth and whatnot too. I'm aware of them, but I've never played any of their games. They're like one of those developers that I constantly know their games and that people love them. Chris is dying from gout, by the way, if you hear me.
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
But so yeah, what kind of game is it? I mean, is it like Dragon's Crown? Is it more of a JRPG, or is it more like a brawler, or what is it?
It's a strategy tactical RPG. So you basically create units with a bunch of different unit types with different unit buffs, and those units go into battle. So you'll like take them and you'll capture a fort, right? If I was going to battle, I would have a command post. Mm-hmm. And from there, I can deploy my units. Those units being made up of, an archer, a mage, a guy on a knight, all of these kind of things. And you can build synergies into there. And you shoot those out from your command post, and then you pick where they're going. And then they'll move at whatever speed. The speed is also determined by whoever's leading the party, right? So if you have like a wyvern rider leading the party, you can fly. You have a guy on a horse, you can go faster. So you just set these units up, point them where to go. You usually have to take over command posts, and then you just do it and let it go, and it all just does itself on its own. So all you're doing is building the teams, attaching weapons, choosing what battles to take and which routes you want to take, and then it fights on its own. It's awesome.
So this sounds an awful lot like two of the mini games that are in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. One of them being the fort. Oh, of course, I'm going to forget what the actual word is right now. But everyone knows the mini game. It sets you up and it puts you in to this world. And you look like the Final Fantasy VII PS1 sprites in it. And you can like throw the people out. So I don't know why I can't think of the name, but either way, there's that. And then there's another one where you're looking for proto relics in that game. And you have these like 3 nodes. And you can go to any 3 of them. And as the active time battle bar builds, you can summon another of 3 different types. And they have, of course, a type triangle of what's weak against what's strong against what. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it sounds like those actually ballooned out with far more mechanical depth than a mini game would have, clearly.
The one issue I have, it's not even an issue, but it's very hard. Not hard, but I don't think I understand the systems enough yet, even after 50 hours, where like some of the stuff I'm doing is clearly not right. So I have to kind of I probably have to just go read it. Honestly, I've been debating today, starting it over just to do the tutorial again. And then
is it a game where you can't do the tutorial without starting a new game?
Well, I don't know, but I'm not talking about like reading through. I'm talking about like the game force feeding me the information that I'm not.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. Like,
I don't think because that's story content in this game. Like the tutorials is part of the story, So,
I mean, I get you, but I still think a game like that would probably benefit from just being like, hey, in the home menu, you can click tutorial and it'll just take you back through it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I get your point too.
It depends on perspective, right? Because again, at the beginning, it's like one of your characters, Joseph, who's an advisor to you, is like, sire, we should do this with this unit, and this is what it'll do. And I think I didn't take enough notes to fully understand where I'm at. And it's the one problem with the game not being super popular right now, because obviously Final Fantasy VII Rebirth just came out too. There's not a lot of YouTube content on it.
Yeah.
So it's one of those games where I'm like, hey, what's the best team comp? And it's like one dude who's talking, but he's at a point that I'm past. So his information isn't even fucking helping me to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's just been a lot of experimenting. And
well, and that's the thing is like the game that you're talking about, Final Fantasy VII has so many mini games with so many specific ways to be good at that people who might have otherwise broke off to make that content are just continuing to make sub content for Final Fantasy VII. That's not even about the main game. It's just, do you want to be really good at this weird side game? Here's how you do it. Here's how you can beat this fort game. Here's how you can beat the motorcycle riding game. This is how you can beat the fucking Red 13 soccer. What is it? Wild Run or whatever. This is how you can be better at the pirate ship shooting. It's like all the Queen's Blood. Here's Queen's Blood decks and where you should. It's like that's the entire thing right now. That game is rife for content if you're a content creator.
Yeah. So that's been my one complication, but I've just been having so much fun. I really like the story. And I just like the gameplay. You know, even though I'm not fully understanding it, every once in a while I'll do like 5 missions and then I'll just delete all the units I have and make them again in different formations and just see how that works. So I don't know. I highly recommend it. I haven't had this much fun with a game in a while. I don't even want to be fucking talking to you. I just want to go play Unicorn Overlord.
Well, thanks, Chris. I'm glad that you wanted to see me so badly.
Hey, man.
All right, so look, MLD 24, the show comes out every year. We're doing this. A lot of podcasts don't talk about these type of games, and I kind of get it. They're a very niche part of the podcast, but you know, I always gush about Gran Turismo and racing games whenever I get into them. So here's a quick second for people to feel seen. What's going on with MLB this year? Is it doing anything really different for you that you're liking, and it's just Unicorn Overlord is kind of overpowering it? Or is this one of those things where I often hear people, and I've dealt with it a little bit in the past on my own with games like FIFA, where it's like I've heard people say the rule for sports games is like roughly every 3 years you'll actually see a change that's big enough for you to be like, oh shit. Do you think that that's the same in MLB, and is this just not one of those years?
I think the thing with MLB is it depends on what you're coming to that game for, you know? Because for me, a lot of the stuff that they upgraded this year was like franchise and stuff like that, and I don't play those modes. I play.
You're all Diamond Dynasty, right?
Oh, yeah, all Diamond Dynasty. So, you know, as long as that works, I'm always going to be in for the next year. So, I mean, to me, it's one of those things where like the lame answer is I don't know and I don't care, but that's the real answer because the Diamond Dynasty plays well. It looks better. There are, you know, player specific animations, which are really cool. And some of the outfielding animations are better. I think the one thing that annoys the shit out of me is there are Negro League players and their bats sound different. And I can't stand it.
Is it because they're considered to be like old school bats that were clearly different in density?
That's what I'm assuming. Yeah. But like, you're not a baseball guy, so you won't understand. But if you're a baseball guy, you know off the bat, like just the crack of the bat, if that's a home run, a pop up, a single, hit it right on the nose, nubbed it, broke his bat. Like you can tell all that from the sound. And the problem I have with these bats is, you know, I'll be hitting with Josh Gibson and I'll pop a ball up that sounds like it went 5,000 feet. And that's pretty frustrating. But otherwise, like it's a great game. It's a great another year of MLB The Show. You know what I mean? Like it's not standout. You know, I picked it on my list and I don't know what it has, but it's not going to crush it in the ratings or on Metacritic. But if you play,
it kind of always does middle. It always does like well, right? Like mid 80s at the lowest, probably.
Exactly. It's a consistent seller.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So since you primarily focus on Diamond Dynasty, how long has that even been a part of the game? Like a part of the series? Has that been like 5-10 years plus at this point? Or is this like a relatively new thing that you just kind of dove into and really liked?
I'm 75% sure there were makings of it on PS3, but I don't remember.
Okay. PS3 Vita. I feel like I remember hearing about Diamond Dynasty for the first time on the couple of years they did the show on Vita. So that doesn't sound way off, like maybe 14, 15. 13.
Yeah, I'm not sure when it started. I'd actually love to know.
So where I'm kind of going is you were talking about how if the rest of the game gets improvements and it's more things like league play and so all those different things like franchise like you were talking about. But what is something? Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is something that you feel like, being, kind of versed in Diamond Dynasty, what you like about the game? Is there really at this point something they could do to drastically change Diamond Dynasty that you'd be like, oh, hell yeah, this is something I've always wanted to see? Or is Diamond Dynasty for you just like the comfort game, essentially, but with New Year's stats behind it?
It's the comfort thing. It's that I have, two of my old subordinates, two of the old people who I used to be the KM for. We play in parties, so we do 3v3 ranked. So that's a big seller. To me, the biggest thing I've wanted from Diamond Dynasty, and I know why they don't do it. It's obvious why they don't do it. But I'd love more loyalty stuff. Like, I've been playing Diamond Dynasty on PS5. Well, not on PS5, but in the Sony ecosystem for like 10 years. So, like, to me, I wish there was a little bit more than like, hey, you got a gold pack and here's your shitty card that you're not going to use after next week. I wish there was something more. Like,
do you almost wish it was like employee appreciation at a company where it's like, you've had 10 consistent years with us. Here's your 10-year
yeah,
your 10-year gift.
Yeah, I know that you can't immediately start the game overpowered, right? But I almost wish they were take one card from last year and bring it with you. Like, I know why they won't, right? Because I would take my Parallel 5 Pedro Martinez and it wouldn't be fair for anybody else. But again, it's an argument that like you and I have had on a different subject of like, yeah, but everyone has that advantage. So what the fuck does it matter if this is too powerful? So it's
you're
it's
right, but
ground.
Look, so like diving into that for a second, you're right. Everyone has that ability, but the problem with that, and I assume that how often you get rewarded in Diamond Dynasty is at least partially tied to your skill level and like how well you do. Correct?
It'll go faster if you're better.
Okay, but otherwise it's a layer of randomness. Correct?
No, you could get everything strictly based on baseball you play, but it would be so many innings that it would be almost impossible, So
like my go-to example for this is like Mag, right, on PS3. I love that game. And I think one of the biggest things that was fighting against that game is that it did have a progression system. And the problem is that there was PSN outage. And so people kind of shy away. And then where a game could have had a second life if it didn't have it to where the progression system meant that anybody new coming in to try and play who hasn't had the chance to build up that benefit that you're talking about are going to inherently get slaughtered by you if it's anything that's player versus player. And so you get into this thing where it's like, well, yeah, but I'm not level 5. We talked about with Helldivers a little bit, right? This idea of like pay to win, where it's like arguably the war bonds that you do have to pay for either with cash or in-game currency, which helps that there's in-game version. But it's like there is critical stuff inside of those, but it doesn't really matter. No one is really calling pay to win because it's a PvE game. And if you're in a party with someone who has that, you benefit from it just as much as they do because they're in your party. And so it's a little different. But Diamond Dynasty, I'm assuming, has a strong PvP element, correct?
It does. I want to say on the Helldivers thing, you can't buy what's in the battle pack with money. So it doesn't matter.
You're right. Yeah, you buy the battle pass, but then you still have to earn the things in it. But there arguably, if you don't do it, yeah, well, the shortcut is buying the battle pass without having to scour every level for super creds, which is a pretty small shortcut, all things considered.
Yeah, because if I do that but get no medals, I don't get the stuff, so it's not pay to win. I still have to earn
because you can't buy medals. Yeah,
right.
That's important. We had a big conversation about that last week, and I think Helldivers does a really good job of balancing that across the board. So
yeah, it's not pay to win.
But
what were you asking about,
I think. So your point about that in general, though, is like, that's kind of taking that ideology about other games like Mag, is that if it allowed you to do it, like you said, you kind of understand why they won't. But for anybody else is thinking like, why wouldn't they? I think one of the clear, obvious things is like, yeah, as much as I agree with you that everybody has that same potential, anybody who's new coming, it may scare them off because they go against someone that they have no ability to stand against immediately, not even late season or anything. And then you kind of just like, oh, I don't really want to do this. And it may hurt player count. Whereas if every year it's a soft refresh, and every time that you're coming in, you're kind of like, oh, good, we're all starting on the same ground. If you're inherently good at the game anyway, you're going to start to do better than them pretty quickly regardless.
Yeah, I don't know. This kind of
does that game onboard people well? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, so let's say that you didn't buy MLB until 6 months later.
Yeah.
Do you think that the game does a good job of reasonably letting someone who's coming in 6 months late catch up and be able to arguably do just as well as you are? Or is it kind of you're too far gone?
I'm not comfortable answering that question.
Okay, that's fair.
Because I've never had that experience. I buy the collector's edition, get early access every year. So, like, I can't tell you what it's like
You're
to come
ahead
in
of the
6
game.
months. Yeah. Like, I can't tell you what it's like to come in 6 months down the line.
Fair enough.
I have to imagine it would be bad. Because you wouldn't have... Because here's the thing, right? I have cards starting now that someone down the line, unless they spent real money, wouldn't be able to get.
Fair enough.
So it's up and down. But I will say, in terms of what you were saying, and it's interesting because I have the same thought on Helldivers, which we can get into. But I think what you were saying is about, you know, you have a bigger thing than me, so you know, your Pedro Martinez is better than my, I don't know, fucking Yu Darvish, right? But that's entirely a matter of perspective because it's entirely about skill, right? It doesn't matter if I have the best cards in the game if I can't hit.
Yeah, you're right.
Like, I can get a couple home runs with 99 Barry Bonds, right? Which doesn't exist. But it doesn't matter if I don't know how to do it consistently, right? I can pull off a few games, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be able to make top rank because I'm not good at it. You know what I mean? Versus where I am, which is how sometimes I feel about Helldivers, where I'm like, we can do this. It's just harder.
We have to get better at the game,
right?
And
exactly.
It's in a lot of the times with the Helldivers, it's not even about getting better at the game. It's about getting better as communicating as a group,
right? Well, that was funny because we were playing the other day and we were having trouble because I misunderstood you and I thought you wanted to play on higher difficulty. But then I was laughing.
I'm glad you said that because I swore that you went to the higher difficulty just to be a dick. And I don't mean that like I wasn't mad about it or anything, but I was like, Chris is playing it off like he misunderstood me and he's just trying to be an ass and going up to a higher difficulty. But apparently that's just really what you thought.
No, because you guys were talking. I swear what I heard you say to Donovan was, do you think you could do it on this difficulty? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, I guess we're doing it on this difficulty.
I'll give you this. I did say that because I said, I don't know if you can do it on Suicide or not. He's like, maybe. I think I could. And I was like, well, good, because it's going to probably be pretty difficult to talk Chris into playing at a lower difficulty. And then you said, what's that about impossible?
Yeah, because that's all I heard. So I'm like, okay, I guess we're doing this. But to me, it was funny.
But you see how it's easy to sound like you were being a smartass, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because I think I was, because what I was laughing at when you were like, what the fuck is I was like, but I said, you don't have to convince me to go higher. Like, that was my response. I'm like, you don't have to convince me to go higher. We'll go higher.
And again, I read that as you being a smartass. Like, oh, you don't have to convince me to go higher. Like, clearly knowing that I said that we should go lower. And you're like, no, you don't have to convince me to go higher.
No,
I've got you.
That was genuinely what I thought you wanted. But I laughed because we got to a point where it was not good. But I laughed because we were all struggling. And then you went, yeah, I just gave up. I'm like, well, that's why we're fucking losing, because you just gave up 20 minutes ago, dude. Like, I don't know what to fucking tell you. You can be as upset as you want. I gave up 5 minutes prior. And then I wasn't upset because I was like, yeah, I just don't care enough tonight to play at this level. Okay, look, this is actually a conversation I've wanted to have for a bit with different people, is this thing about how malleable maybe is not quite the right word. Variable is probably the better word. But how variable your skill level is from one day to quite literally the next day. There are days where I'm playing Helldivers and I'm like, I'm clicked in, I'm doing great, I'm very on it, I know what's going on, I'm feeling it, and I'm kicking ass. And then the next day I feel like I'm trying as hard, but it's not connecting. And I'm like, okay, so is the game being different now? Because the game does have a lot of random elements to it. So I'm like, is it the game, or am I sucking more today? Like, is my skill level for today? Maybe I didn't get enough sleep last night. Yeah. Maybe I had too stressful of a day, and this is a too stressful of a game to continue that. And I'm fighting against myself without realizing it. Like, I've been wondering. There's a secondary conversation in that I appreciate that Helldivers, as I've come to realize,
every single difficulty matters in that game.
Yeah.
And for a lot of reasons, both for onboarding new players, but also for high-end players to be like, oh shit, I need to get common samples, and I'm going to have an easier time doing that if I'm playing on like challenging or hard or whatever. Like if you want a certain type of sample, you can get them on all difficulties, or at least you can get all of them at the highest difficulties, but you're going to have a harder time. Because I think one thing we've noticed is the higher the difficulty, the more it becomes about doing the primary objective and less about doing side objectives. And so, yeah, you can get those samples, but really you're going to have an easier time getting common samples if that's what you need, if you play on like medium or hard or whatever.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Well, and look, one of the things that, in terms of the difficulty, I think it entirely depends on how the team is deciding to play. Like, that's, I think, one of the conversations we need to have is like, okay, we got a 4-stack in. How hard do you want to go? Because if we don't want to try that hard, we should be dropping it down. But to me, that's the thing, right? If I'm playing Helldivers, I want to play Helldivers. So we're going to do it on the hardest difficulty because that's the fun. But I remember noticing that night is there was not a single person actually communicating. And I got annoyed and I just started doing the objective by myself and just following the civilians. And I think by the end I had almost finished it because I was just doing the objective, but none of us were talking. You had fucked off. And
I really hadn't fucked off. I just wasn't I wasn't actively trying to get because I was trying to open the doors and go back, but there was that chokehold point we kept getting. Look, this is not the most riveting podcast at this point. But look, you're right insofar as my headspace was not for that difficulty, and I kind of knew that. Yeah. And then you went for it, but everyone else was okay, so I was trying to like play into it. Like, okay, fine, I could probably make it work, and I just don't think I could. That
well, I'm not even.
The reality.
I wasn't even trying to shit talk you. All I'm saying is that had everyone decided like, oh fuck it, we're just going to come together and do this, we would have gotten it done. It wasn't that hard. It was just one of those things where we were all so spread out, and that's the thing with Helldivers, right? It's a team game, and on extreme, hard, even the beginning difficulties, you can play that game by yourself. But when we're playing Impossible, it's like, all right, we got to lock in, we got to actually have a conversation and then play. And that's what I like about Helldivers. But again, that's, I think, a thing where we have to be like, how are we feeling today?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you're right, clearly, because one thing that Donovan noted, and I've clearly noted a lot of times before, is like usually when I'm playing with you and Sean, Donovan, that first night that you got on and I had to hop off because y'all were kind of delayed and we were in the middle of the mission, Donovan was like, dude, they like communicate like crazy. I was like, yeah, they do. And then that night we got on, I was like, even Chris and Sean weren't communicating with each other the way y'all usually do. Yeah. And I was like, I was kind of feeding off of y'all's thing. I was like, well, they don't seem to care much either. So I'm just gonna kind of, it's like I was a little more I'm in this to hang out because I still had a good time just bullshitting with you guys.
Well, that's
it was
where I was at with it.
It reached a point where I was like, I think it's clear that I am not going to be able to do a whole lot better than what I'm doing right now. So I'm just going to keep playing. Like I didn't literally give up and set the controller down or anything. I was like, I don't think I have much more juice to give this tonight.
Yeah. It's an interesting game in that way because like,
it is.
I can power through Unicorn Overload on, an empty tank of gas, but you're not getting me on Helldivers like half asleep. It's not something I'm doing. Yeah, that's the way it is right now. So I don't know. We'll see. I like Helldivers. I want to go get that platinum, so we'll have to look out for that. But
I'm really close.
Yeah, I am.
Like I'm really close. So I think we can make it happen.
That's the thing with MLB. I'm very close, but it was funny. I said to TT Dog, I'm like, I actually don't give a fuck about trophies in MLB. That is not why I play this one game. I get the platinum every year, but I don't care at all about the trophies. So I'll get them.
But you just get it. Because it's like most sports games where it's like if you just really enjoy the game and you play it a shitload, you're probably going to end up with the platinum.
Yeah.
It's just most people don't really like sports games as much as they say they do because most people don't get the platinums. I have a buddy, Eric, who sometimes watches the show, who has gotten the platinum in multiple NFL games because he's just kind of like, I just play it. I just keep playing it. And then one day I get the platinum and I never even intended. He doesn't care about trophies at all. And all of his platinums are just random sports games that he didn't try on, and that's kind of impressive. Like I like that.
No, it is. Yeah, and that's the thing with MLB. So it'll be like, oh, I'm close to the platinum. I guess I'll knock out this mode I don't want to play, and then move forward. So MLB's great.
Yeah,
Balatro's great. Unicorn Overload is game of the year. So Enjoy your time.
I love how quickly every game that you play that you end up liking is game of the year until the next one.
Yeah.
Without fail.
And
Helldivers, game of the year. Bellagio, game of the year. Unicorn Overlord,
Did I
game
ever
of the year.
actually say that about Helldivers?
You did.
Oh,
I'm about 85% positive.
Well,
if you didn't, I could easily be conflating Blake in this scenario where we were playing together. I know Blake has said it, but I may be conflating the day that we were playing together and him saying it.
Got it.
But look,
what have you been playing?
Helldivers incredible. Well, I played a lot of Helldivers. I played so much Helldivers lately because getting the game for Donovan, he's like, Helldivers? I'm like, fuck it, yeah, I guess. I'll hop over. I've been playing a lot more Rebirth. I'm still not done with it. I'm chapter 12, about 51 hours into it. Doing side content here and there. And I still think the game is great. But I do want to have a conversation. We have a question that came in from Maru/Kiki. And they asked, do you feel like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is peak Final Fantasy when it comes to battle system, open world exploration, and side quests? I personally want them to keep using this formula because it's perfectly balanced. And I want to tell you conversations I have been having with Velvet in the background because I adore this game. I think it's very good. It's very well made. But I adore it because its charm is able to make me... suffer is a strong word, but it allows me to push through parts of the game that I am like, how? Why did this get through testing as something that was considered good? Why would you waste resource development time on this the way that you did? And it's a lot of it's just in the DNA of this game. They really tried keeping with this idea of like old Final Fantasy VII being like very mini game driven. It's always been there. And I want to say this. I think that in some ways, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has peak Final Fantasy energy. And I think that there's a lot of times where that seems to be belied by various other things. So I'm going to answer this by going a little bit more in depth. I know Chris doesn't have much input on this, so I'm going to try and be relatively brief with this. But open world, let's start there. You know, he talked about battle system, open world exploration, side quest. So actually, I'll start at battle system. That one's quick and easy. I think the battle system's excellent. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's very fun. It tries to mix the best of hot topic moment right here. I am more or less of the group of people that ATB combat systems, even when they were not presented in the way this is, are still not turn-based. They never were. There's some people that find that to be a hot-ass take, and they still think ATB is turn-based. No. The moment Final Fantasy games started using ATB battle, they stopped being turn-based. So if you want Final Fantasy to return to turn-based, what you really mean is you want like Final Fantasy 1 through 4. But point being here,
exactly right.
Yeah, point being here, I think that this game does a really good job of kind of mixing the elements that people would find more appealing in a modern setting of it being real time most of the time, but with this element of you have to build up these bars so that you can do more important things that the entire thing goes. So for that system, I think it works great. And when you contrast it against what Final Fantasy 16 did, where it was just an action game and it really kind of unapologetically was that with a little bit of light RPG elements, this is one where it's like, no, there's weaknesses. Everything has a weakness and you can exploit that weakness. So if something's weak to ice, you can use moves that have ice or use ice spells specifically. And I love that. And I think it works really well. And I also think that you get more of a party build in here where it's like, what's each party member doing? So for me, it's like Cloud is my consistent heavy hitter. Yuffie is like my quick ability to build ATB quickly so I can do different spells or different jutsus depending on what I need to be able to get rid of. And then Aerith is my way to heal the party. I just constantly use Prey. I've got Prey with a materia that bumps it up to the next level. So that's how my party is most of the time when I have free reign over it, when the game's not locking the party out. I think it does a great job of that, and I can see why people would want that. We move to the open world, and I think the open world's weird because I think the open world fights itself. And one of the things I remember thinking whenever I was early playing, Chris, you played a decent chunk of Ghost of Tsushima, right? I know you never beat it, but you experienced some of the world exploration, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so you remember one of Ghost of Tsushima's like big things was that it wasn't, you weren't activating towers and popping map icons. You were just walking around and you'd see a fox. And you're like, oh shit, If I follow this fox, it's going to take me somewhere. Oh shit, here's a bird. If I follow this bird, it's going to take me somewhere. And you would kind of explore that way. And you'd either find something organically, or you would find this owl or whatever it be, you know, some kind of animal that's going to lead you back to something. And it was more like you're not just having to stay on a map. You can explore the whole world without ever really needing to look at a map. This game has elements of that. You'll be walking and running, and you'll see a bird in the sky, and you'll be like, oh shit, what's this bird doing? If you follow the bird, oh look, here's a life spring. That's cool. And then you'll be like, oh, cool, what's this? There's these crystal on the ground. I break it. Oh, this little orb of light comes up, and it kind of wisps around and starts going in a direction. If I follow it and break more of these crystals along the way, oh shit, these are for summon crystals that you can go analyze. Hell yeah, cool. And then it's like the rest of the game just kind of becomes this thing where this game feels so behind the times at times, where there's like Ubisoft towers in this game where you climb them and you activate, you just hit triangle on them and activate them, and then it pings out the map, and then it pulls your map up and it shows you things that were within that circle that you can go do. And I'm like, why would you even bother making the bird be on the map or the crystals be out there if I'm supposed to go and activate these towers? So I don't know what it is, but it feels like the game was originally approaching or trying to do a more natural world exploration by being like, you see things that lead you to things because you're just like, oh shit, there's a bird. Wonder where that goes. And it's fighting that. I think this is way better than 15, which is the only other mainline Final Fantasy game that's single player that has an open world, if we're being honest. Mm-hmm. So in that way, yeah, I do think this is peak for Final Fantasy, but I don't think it's peak for gaming. Okay. So let me say that. And then secondarily, within that open world, it's like they brought in the yellow paint, which is not a problem. But what is the problem is that you move through them so goddamn slowly, Chris. When you hop on a fucking thing, you know, like when you're playing like Horizon or Uncharted, that like they're pretty nimble and they're like moving along these lines quite quickly.
Yeah.
Cloud like jumps, grabs the ledge, kind of has this animation where he droops back down, and then you can jump again. And it takes just as long as I just described.
Oh my God.
And there's sometimes 20 of those. And you're just like, why the fuck is this so slow?
Yeah, that's not.
And good. It's not a rendering speed, because there's times where the game flings you way across, or you're on a chocobo fucking hauling ass, and it can render everything in for the most part.
Really?
So it's just odd game design choice. And it's weird because almost all of these are things that were gaining popularity, but Final Fantasy never got to really explore.
Right.
10 years ago, 12 years ago. But now they have a chance, so they're doing it. They're doing Ubisoft towers and handholds, and you know.
I love that. I love climbing
so there's
up
that.
Radios.
Yeah, last things I'll mention, because he mentioned side quest on here. I'm going to do a quick aside for stealth. Stealth in this game is fucking awful. And thankfully it's only for some reason you've got to stealth chocobos. You can't, when you get to a new region, almost all of them, you have to go fuck around and sneak around to find the chocobo and then surprise it so that you can get it. And if the other chocobos see you, they alert them and they all run off and you have to retry. And if you don't do it, you don't have to do it. But if you don't do it, you have no chocobo, you have no fast way around the region.
Jeez.
Yeah. Kind of fucking sucks. So you have to sneak up on these goddamn chocobos, and it's the worst mechanics ever. It's like throwing rocks and hitting levers and trying to stand behind it. It's awful. I don't know why anyone was like, yeah, that's fun. This should be in the game. You should just have to fucking find the chocobo stand, rent the chocobo, and go about your business. But it's just not what it is. I fucking hate it. But no, side quest. And Chris, I think you'll remember this.
Okay.
Sean hopped into Helldivers one night. We were talking about side content, not like actually in depth, but just kind of, he was saying that, you know, he's doing some of the side content, and he was saying, like, you know, some of it's okay, some of it's not great, but it's all better than Final Fantasy 16's. And he was like, Final Fantasy 16's dog trash. And I don't fucking know what he means. If anything in 16 is bad, then this game is equally as bad. I think he just likes these. He has a soft spot and nostalgia for these characters, so he doesn't give a shit.
Dude, I don't know. I once told Sean that I liked the Fates, and he told me I didn't watch Advent Children, so I didn't know what I was talking about. So It's like, okay.
Oh, fucking.
I don't.
It's funny. I'm
argue
pretty
with it
sure
at all.
Advent Children actually plays a pretty big. I can't say for sure. This is completely. I'm not far enough to know. I'm pretty sure Advent Children plays a pretty big part in what's going on here, though.
Well, because I told him my theory, and I don't know. You can. I don't have any contest to say if my theory is correct or not. Do you think I can say it out loud?
I don't know, because you might even ruin Remake for someone even at a small pack. Because here's like your theory is entirely based off at least some sections of Remake that some people may have not played and seen yet.
I told you my theory after I finished chapter 2.
Yeah, fair enough. Once you know what the whispers are, it's kind of like, that's as much as I'll say. Once you know what the whispers are, I think you can start theory crafting pretty easily.
Yeah, I thought it was very obvious what was going on after chapter 2. And from what I understand, my theory is correct, but I don't know. So for me, it's just
we'll see. For that sake, we're not going to say anything further on it. Yeah. But yeah, I just think it's funny because there's some really bad side quests here and there's some fine ones. And all I really mean by that is I just don't think that 16 can be dog trash with this one be. Like Velvet was saying he thought that the side content in 16 was better. And I could see that because the side content in 16 is more about character, like small character arc stuff. It's like, oh, go collect these parts. And it's fucking fetch quests. You're going and killing some animals to get a certain material and then bringing it back to a dude and talking. But all the cutscenes are like, oh, well, this is helping the hideaway. And because this person does this, so I'm trying to help them do this. And it's just building the world out. Is it doing it in the best way possible? Nah. Is it fine? I think so. And I think this game sometimes does that, and sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes it's just like, here's a side content that you probably need to do so you're not under-leveled. And you can keep going if you're under-leveled, but you're going to have a hard time. Yeah. So I won't say too much more, but I just think as much as I've praised 7, I did think it was important for me to say, like, 7's not a perfect game. It has growing pains from being the first Final Fantasy game to really get to play around with open world design. And they're just, in many ways, they're woefully behind the industry because they haven't had enough time to do this. And part of the reason you can kind of know that is that they talked about how they were able to make this game as densely as it is in such a short amount of time. And I'll give them credit. That's true. But I think that came at the fact that they mentioned that they were able to do it because almost all of the team from Remake stayed around. Well, one thing that's true about Remake is it's not open world at all. Mm-hmm. And so if you take the same people who were the primary designers behind Remake, when I think it works really well in Remake, it's a linear game. And then you go, hey, how would you make an open world? I don't think that that's the right people. I think that they should have been like, hey, can we bring some people in who have maybe made an open world in the last 3 years? And it probably would have benefited the game. But hey, it's better than 15, so take it for what you will.
So let me ask you a quick question, Brett. I've mentioned a couple of times I have some time off next week.
Sure.
Would you say Final Fantasy 16 or 7 and Rebirth?
7 and Rebirth is a hard sell because if you haven't noticed, Rebirth is quite fucking long.
Yes. I have heard that.
And here's the thing. I have probably done about, as far as I am, I've probably done about 30 to 40% of the side content along the way. So not even an excessive amount. And I'm at 50 something hours. Oh, so even if you are just trying to run through it knock 30% off of that. You're still at like fucking 30 hours into the game.
So I guess the better thing is, do I finish Final Fantasy 16? Because I think in my 11 days I can finish that game. Or do I finish 7 Remake and start
to prepare
Rebirth?
For Rebirth? Yeah.
Because I'm almost done with 7. It's like chapter 9 or 10.
Tell you what, this is what you do, Chris. Yeah. You ready? Beat 7.
Okay.
Remake. Okay. And then go and play 16. Because you basically just started 16. And I say this because 16 and 7 Remake and Rebirth are going to be so different that it'd be nice to have the kind of palette cleanser between the two, because 16 is a very different game, both tonally, combat wise, across the board. And I think that you'll like both for very different reasons. You'll like 16 insofar as you like very well told fantasy drama, Game of Thrones and stuff like that. And you'll like 7 and Remake and Rebirth because of and Rebirth specifically because of your more Yakuza tendencies.
Oh, okay. I like that. Can I ask one question about Rebirth as someone totally uneducated?
Sure, good.
I guess potential spoilers, Brett. Maybe you can decide if you want to cut this out. But I've been hearing a lot of complaining about mini games,
Sure.
and from what I don't understand why it's an issue, because isn't half this game in like some fucking carnival or something?
Half the game is no, but there are a couple chapters where you're at the Gold Saucer. That's not really a spoiler at all in and of itself. The Gold Saucer is like one of the most iconic parts of Final Fantasy VII. Most people know it even if they don't realize they know it. If you know Chocobo racing, you know the Gold Saucer.
So my confusion has come with like,
so it's like a indoors fucking, what do you even call it? Like a amusement park?
Yeah, so it's been confusing me, and I'd like your take on it, because the way this has all sounded to me when I'm seeing on Twitter and stuff without context is like if you played Fallout New
Port
Vegas,
Condor, by the way, I think is what it's called.
Walked into the casinos on the Strip, and then we're like, why is there so much poker in Fallout?
Okay, so let me give you a little context.
Okay.
I run the risk of spoiling. I don't think it's a huge spoiler, but I'll tell you this much. There are many games, depending on some of it, how much you want to dig into side content. There are many games separate from the Gold Saucer, quite a bit of them. Costa del Sol's got a bunch of them, but it's kind of like a vacation resort town. So it feels reasonable that it would have a bunch of like games to play as part of vacation.
Right.
So I would say,
are you forced to do
75% of the game feels like it matches the area that you're in tonally, and like it matches the utility. And then there's parts of the game where you kind of like, a couple of them are forced, where it's like, I don't really get the value of this, but I have to do it to progress the story.
Okay.
I don't think that's as often, but the story does kind of go like Costa del Sol. You're going to have to play some of those mini games to move the story along, because like the main scenario requires you to get beachwear.
Got it.
And for you to get beachwear, you got to do these games so you can get tickets to trade in for beachwear in Costa del Sol. That's just one of the examples. There's another one where you have to try and get to a higher place, and there's a dolphin.
I've heard about this, yes.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of aspects where it is required, but so it just depends. Like, right, if you hate mini games, you're probably not going to like this. But if you're open to the idea of like, hey, this is like a quick 2 minutes of something different that I never have to do again if I don't want to in the game, it's not that bad.
I don't have. I'd honestly say
Yakuza plays because I think Yakuza does the same thing, except for the Yakuza doesn't tend to actually require them in the story insofar as I've played so far. Like I beat Kiwami, I played some Zero. I don't remember ever being forced to do something that felt minigame like, but I did a lot of minigame stuff in the side content, because I did a lot of the side content in Kiwami.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I would never say you're forced in there. Anyway, it's just something I was curious about, because it always seemed like punching yourself in the face and being upset that you got punched in the face, that you're choosing to engage with this content.
Look, some people are going to treat it this way. Some people are going to go, "What, you hate fun?" But the reality is like if you don't like the mini games and they're not providing the fun that the rest of the game is for you, it's a valid complaint, or at least I won't call it a complaint. It's a valid criticism of the game. Is maybe there's too many mini games and maybe too many of them are required.
I just knew about the Golden Saucer, and I'm like, why is it a problem that you go to a casino and there's mini games? But like what you're saying puts it into more context. Where I'm like, okay, I guess I maybe can see it, but honestly, that just sounds fun to me. So I don't know.
I think you will enjoy it, but I also completely understand why some people might not enjoy it. And that's why I go towards saying that this game has like a Kingdom Hearts vibe to it, because a lot of Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, they've got a lot of mini games that are part of the game. Like in Kingdom Hearts 2, you go to, in the first Kingdom Hearts, you go to the Little Mermaid, you go to Atlantis, and you're just underwater attacking, and you have to deal with swimming mechanics and everything. But in the second game, even though I liked it in the first game, the second game, it's fucking Guitar Hero for singing. You're just hitting buttons on rhythm to the words of Under the Sea. And that's it. And you go to the storybook with Winnie the Pooh, the 100-Acre Wood, and you're popping balloons and shit to save Piglet. It's like Kingdom Hearts has got a lot of the design philosophy that Square employed in the PS1 days. And that's part of why people love it, because it kind of keeps some of that weird charm around. And I think that's why people are liking Rebirth, because it brings some of that charm around in a way that you haven't seen often outside of almost always Japanese games. And even then, it's few and far between. It's things like Yakuza, Rebirth, and the occasional weird mini game in like Kingdom Hearts 3. So
nice. Well, it sounds like fun.
One day, I hope you get around to it and enjoy it. But I do think if you beat 7, hop over to 16. 16 is your bread and butter in a good way, and it'll give you a nice tone cleansing, so that when you hop back into Rebirth, it's going to feel like, oh, this is a nice contrast.
That's probably
think of it like preparing a 3-course meal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right,
like that.
You're trying to wrap everything up to where each one has like a contrast to the other, and you're like, these all serve a purpose, but they all come together to be a great time.
It's honestly kind of perfect, because Remake is a more linear game, right?
16
and then we've
is like
got
hub-based.
The meaty, dark, gristled story, and then we got like Kawaii Sit-Up Simulator coming up right after that. So I'm
yep.
It sounds great. I love that. That's perfect.
You nailed it. Let's go. All right. So we're going to go into the community's take real quick. And we didn't get a ton of answers, but those of you who did gave some good insights. And that was a simple one. Joe and I got into a conversation last week about, and him and I differed on where we actually thought this was going. But it was kind of about the future of PlayStation and how long, if at all, do I think it will take for PlayStation to either start releasing day and date on PC, or if it's crazy enough to ever think that, hey, maybe, just maybe, we'll see PlayStation do something similar to Xbox, where they start releasing some of their games on Xbox for some reason. We got into that discussion, but it kind of led to a thing of like, how do you feel about the future of PlayStation as a whole? And with how crazy the last couple of years have been in the gaming landscape, do you think PlayStation will make a drastic change? Or do you picture them doubling down kind of Nintendo style into what works for them and continuing that way? And I asked this because in my mind, I think PlayStation has long been this kind of in between for Microsoft and Nintendo, where in a lot of ways, PlayStation is stubborn and they double down and do their own thing, but they're far more open to the idea of doing something different than Nintendo is, and they're open to changing. Whereas Xbox kind of throws caution to the wind, is like, we're going to try this, we're going to try this, we're going to try this. And all three have their purpose in the industry. And it's probably the only reason that all three of them have stayed in different ways. So, Chris, I want to kind of hear your answer on this first, since you weren't here last week. I mean, what do you think? Do you think you'll ever see PlayStation do something as drastic as maybe even releasing games on opponents' platforms or day and date PC, or what?
Well, I mean, we've already crossed the day and date PC bridge. Helldivers, Concord.
Let me clarify, just so we know, just so it's obvious, with single player games. Because I agree with you, and I even brought that up. I think Helldivers and the fact that they've announced it for the others is clear that service-based titles will be coming to PC day and date, and it makes sense as to why they would.
Well,
so
yeah. And
let's say The Last of Us Part 3. Is there a world and a future in where you can see that PC day and date?
Yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm.
But again,
why?
It's
out of curiosity.
It's more of a situation of when that game comes out, because like if you were like Ghost of Tsushima 2, I would say no. Okay,
let me rephrase the question.
Go for it.
Because I think this can add some context, right? Let's say The Last of Us Part 3 comes out in 2028.
No.
Okay. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is yes, insofar as you'd never say never, because it is possible, but you don't necessarily see it anywhere close on the horizon.
No, I think you would have to prove out that it's a big enough market to do so. The single player games are hard, because the question then would become, okay, then why do I need the PS5? The question actually, realistically, the question becomes, why do I need anything but a Steam Deck? That's the question that becomes there. So it's a hard sell for me to think that Sony would want to do it. But I wouldn't be surprised if they look at something like The Last of Us and go, wow, Neil spent $400 million Like, we have to put this somewhere else. That's I think the situation we're looking at is it'll depend on budget. And it's an interesting thing because I was having a conversation the other day where I was saying that we need smaller games, we need cheaper games, but then internally Sony was like, hey, what if we split up Spider-Man 3 into 2 games? And once that leaked, the internet melted down about it, right? So I think it will entirely depend on the game, and it will entirely depend on how much the budget is. But I can tell you right now, if you asked me my gut feeling on Spider-Man 3, I would say day and date PC.
Interesting. And because I think we both agree Spider-Man 3 doesn't seem super far off, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's super far off.
Well, let me go there. I think if anything, Spider-Man 3 is like a 2028 game.
Yeah, because we've got another game coming in 20. We already know the lineup, so it just depends on delays at that point. So
yeah, arguably you would imagine that at the cadence that Insomniac has been able to hit, if they manage to stay at that cadence, then we should have some kind of game from them within the next year and a half, 2 years max. We should have a game from them by 25, late 25, early 26.
Wolverine will be in August next year, and then it'll just depend on how long Spider-Man 3 takes, but yeah, it is a big worry about.
And if they do a half game, right? Do they do a Miles Morales like game for Spider-Man?
And that would be the interesting place where, like, does
that come to PC day and date?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
like a game that small. Like, do they just say, what if they do? Hey, Venom is coming out for season pass owners, or you can buy it on PS3, or hey, you can buy the $90
PS5,
edition.
Chris.
That's what I meant.
I know you've been playing a lot of PS3. But
you can get this $90 edition of Spider-Man 2 launching on PC, and it comes with Venom. Like, I could see that. Like, why not do that kind of stuff? So I don't think it will be Xbox where it's every game is day and date, but I think it's a little naive to think that nothing will come day and date.
That's whether not a service game.
Yeah, whether it's big or whether it's small is a factor. But I don't know. I think that Sony will start bringing all their games there, so I do think it's inevitable that something comes day and date. Whether it's The Last of Us or whether it's the new game from Santa Monica, it could very well be a situation where, like, hey, this is a new IP, it's launching day and date everywhere, but something like The Last of Us, something like God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, those will stay as timed console exclusives. Like, who knows?
I'll tell you where I played devil's advocate a little bit last week, and this is also truly my stance. I see no reason to think that Sony doesn't still see clear value in true exclusives, and that the real value for true exclusives lies in single player games. So I pretty strongly believe that for at least the next 10 years, unless something insane does happen to the industry at large, like maybe streaming takes hold way quicker and at a way higher level than any of us can anticipate, something crazy like that. But I think if things go in a relatively reasonable, how they've always gone, where you can see a clear lineup, I think there's no reason to think that Sony doesn't see the value of exclusives, even if it means down the line they eventually lose exclusivity as they come to a new audience, like they've been doing.
There's a wrinkle here.
Go ahead.
And it all depends on Microsoft. I know that sounds ridiculous, and this isn't a fanboy console war thing, but if we get to a point where Halo MCC is on PlayStation 5, right? Do we look at the console war? I know it sounds ridiculous, but the fight between the two consoles is kind of over already. But does Sony start going, fuck it, we'll go day and date PC when Microsoft fully capitulates? When Microsoft is like, hey, listen, here, Blade day one, here's Hellblade 2, by the way. When they're no longer trying to beat them in console sales, do they just go, fuck it? We might as well. Because Blake
my real answer is no, because they still actively want as many people buying it on their platform as possible because they get the most money from it. And even if you look, hear me out. If you look, PC has barriers for certain people and less barriers for other. Part of it depends on how often you want to have to deal with manually updating, or the chance that something component wise can go wrong on your PC and you may not know how to work it. But I think generally speaking, PC and things like Steam Deck are becoming simple enough that the barrier between console and it is a lot thinner in terms of user friendliness. And so I think what happens is Sony is willing to put the games on PC down the line, and who knows how far down the line becomes a line too far for them. But I think that they do it down the line because arguably they still want people buying PlayStation over everything. And I think they don't really, even if Xbox is not their console competition anymore, PC, as Jim Ryan clearly even stated, is still a form of competition for them. And they don't want to suddenly lose people from buying their own machine if they go, well, why would I ever buy a PS5 if I can get all these games the same day as everyone else on PC? Maybe I should see what the barrier of entry on PC is and how reasonable it is and how many of these games can run on Steam Deck day one. And there's a new Steam Deck supposed to be coming out that's more powerful this year, right? And all of these things compound to Sony being like, we still want it to be easiest of access to hit our system. We still want to have there be a reason why you choose us, because you're going to get these games early. And if you choose not to buy into us, we'll double dip by moving to PC down the line, except for when it's live service games where the game lives and dies and the monetization lives and dies based on how active the player base is.
Yeah.
And I think that that's how I view it currently.
I will say, I do think they should be bringing their live services to Xbox. I see no reason.
I specifically said
Helldivers
last week
is not on Xbox. I don't see why.
Well,
Concord
do you mean day
there.
one?
Yeah, day one.
See, I think I disagree there, but I think my disagreement is like a modification of what I just said. I think it still makes sense, and Sony still clearly sees the value in exclusives to where PC day one makes sense. Definitely for that type of game. But I still think what you do is you leverage your console exclusivity. Let's call it 6 months, 3 months. And you go, hey, you're going to play Helldivers, 3 months before everybody on Xbox, but you'll eventually get it on Xbox. That way it's good for the community of the game. Maybe it's 6 months, like I said. Maybe it's, hey, we'll give it 6 months of exclusivity. And when you look at, Microsoft moving Sea of Thieves over 6 years down the line, it's like, that seems pretty expedited in comparison. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Look, I think I get it. Like, there's the arguments to make against it. But, like, okay, here's even the thing for me, right? Sea of Thieves coming 6 years down the line. Just to put a
cap on mine to give you kind of, and then I'm going to let you just speak freely, but with this context added, my entire argument hinges, and could potentially be broken, my entire argument hinges from the fact that I think it's obvious, in my opinion, that Sony still sees the value of exclusivity.
Sure.
And I think that that's clear because otherwise they wouldn't give a shit about paying for exclusivity for Rebirth or any of these things. Yeah. And so if you let that logic kind of go through and pull through and permeate through, I think it gives you your answer of how they'll treat a lot of these things. Like eventually Final Fantasy probably is able to go onto other consoles if Square sees the investment valuable. So with that in mind, continue on with what you were saying.
The thing for me, right, is it better to get everyone in the zeitgeist of Helldivers on day one, or is it better to split that audience down the line? Right? Because to me, and obviously this is revisionist history because Sea of Thieves is 6 years old, but if you were going to do this, what benefit did you get not having it on PlayStation for 6 years? Right? Because not to shit talk Sea of Thieves, I'm very excited, but there's not 100,000 signatures on a petition to get Sea of Thieves on PlayStation. There is for Helldivers. And I think that's one of those things where you look at the success of Helldivers and you look at the 25 people on Xbox who really want to play it and you go, okay, fuck it, we'll put it in there. And it's one of those interesting things where you go, Microsoft is now also a partner. Do we just work with them on this one game? We're making money off them. The war bonds that they're buying, we're making money. Any microtransactions, we're making money. With a live service game, I don't see how exclusivity benefits them. Unless you want to look at me and go, we don't believe that opening a pipeline for Microsoft makes financial sense. because clearly a lot of companies don't feel that way. That's why Monster Hunter Stories is not coming to Xbox, right? It's not because Sony.
Yeah, there's no way they paid for that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, what is the benefit truly of a games as a service being exclusive to your platform? I'm not sure how many. I know Joe said that Luke got on a PlayStation and bought a year of Plus just to play Helldivers and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
That's cool. That happens, but it does. I don't know that it happens often enough where it's worth not putting it there. And how much bigger is Helldivers today if it's on Xbox? I get it. I get that they need exclusives, but how much bigger is it now? We're not talking about God of War 2018. That's never coming to Xbox. But something like Helldivers, I think, should absolutely be there. And Sony should be leveraging any kind of relationship they have with Microsoft to be like, put Master Chief in it. Let us put Chief in it. Like anything they can do to strengthen their friendship that they're going to need now, which I guess is actually pretty good since Sony did a lot of development on Sea of Thieves. But,
yeah.
I just see
for anybody listening, they aided in development a lot to get it. They didn't develop Sea of Thieves, but they aided in making sure that the technicians there knew how to get the game running in tip-top form for their system.
Exactly. So
just so no words can be minced.
Right. I know they didn't make Sea of Thieves. Just like when Sony bought Bungie, people were like, "Oh, they own Halo now. That's cool." So yeah, look, I don't know if I'm making sense. I feel like I am, but I do feel like live service, you should put it as many places as it can go. I would even look at you and go, Helldivers should be on phones. Like it should be literally everywhere because that's how you make the most money. I would have made the same argument for factions, that the Last of Us factions should have been day and date on Xbox because that's how you get the most players for a multiplayer game.
Yeah. So look, I'm going to kind of give my thoughts on these in reverse, and then I want to read what the people had to say in the community stake. Yeah. But so first thing, kind of addressing, going back to that idea of like, it's how you make money and why wouldn't you? And I think you're right. Like, right. We're what we're talking about, our project we're working on in the background, right? I think you're falling victim to kind of what I fall victim to sometimes, where I'm looking at the individual thing and I'm like, in a vacuum of looking at this against the other thing. So in this case, right, you'd say like, okay, looking at a game in a vacuum and comparing it with other games, right? So we're looking at it in a kind of a larger vacuum, but the idea of game against game against game. You look and you go, why would you not want to be as a live service game on as many things as possible because of monetization and all these things? And you're right. At a individual level for per game, even a game like Helldivers, if you look at it with no extra context, I think it's really easy to see that. And it feels almost intuitive, right? Where you're like, yeah, that would be clearly your best bet. But then I think you move it up, right? You go to the next level up and you start to open the macro. Well, Helldivers is from PlayStation. PlayStation is owned by Sony, who owns a company where the whole point is to own a system that they drive you to so they get the most of your money as you can. So when you start to combine these and you go, okay, well, they do want a lot of people buying these things, and they want to make the money from microtransactions, but they also want to make as much money as they can from you buying the game. And since there is no publisher split here, they're getting 100%, arguably, of Helldivers purchases, right, on PlayStation, and then they're getting 70% of it off of Steam, which is pretty high. That's pretty good, right? And then I think that they're doubling that with, okay, so people who are probably not going to play this on PC, but would play it on the console realm, we want them to want to buy our console or to stay on our console long term because we make the money we're not making from the microtransactions from the potential Xbox crowd, we're making also, and probably in excess of that, from people who are buying every game they play on our system because they bought into us because of our exclusivity. And so if you keep looking at it that way, it's like the macro view of it makes sense to keep it exclusive to a decent degree. And I think making the, whatever you want to call it, I guess, I wouldn't call it a sacrifice, but kind of leaning in and going, but it's still a game that we need to make sure from a monetization standpoint has as much support day one as we can get without compromising going to a competitor. We'll go to a lesser competitor in PC, a market we already dipped our toes into, and then we go, okay, you can have it. And even if it's timed exclusivity, like we're seeing with Sea of Thieves, I think you look at that and you go, okay, that's the benefit. Once Helldivers is no longer pushing people to buy consoles, where right now there's a very real the zeitgeist is important. And there really will be people who go, I've never owned a PlayStation, but this game is getting talked about so much. I don't want to mess with PC. I haven't really loved my Xbox for the past year. Maybe I'll just sell my Xbox and buy a PlayStation. And now PlayStation has one more potential long-term big spender customer, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, and look, I think both of these points are fair. And it's just offering a why might Sony not go that route. So, as for it, just because it's a good thing to note for anybody who hadn't really realized, when Joe was talking about Luke buying a year of PS Plus and the game, that is kind of like what Sony wants. They want this one game. This is ideal customer for them. If one game can get a purchase of the game and not only a month, but a whole year of their subscription service, you have just added so much value to them. You essentially just buy a game, and then your subscription was the same price as you buying, if you bought a year, I guess it depends on what he bought. If he bought the basic, it's still about the same as buying a game and a half or two. So this man who normally doesn't buy PS5 games has just bought 2.5 games as far as Sony's concerned, right?
Yeah.
Last thing, kind of going back to what you were talking about of when is the right time? Is it better to have it day and date so that you have this big impact all at once? Or is it better to arguably, you didn't say it, but clearly if you read between the lines, is it better to double dip later? And I think I see the aspect of why double dipping would be good, but you talked about looking at Sea of Thieves and it coming over 6 years, and people weren't asking for Sea of Thieves at a level of writing, hey, here's my my poll or my whatever. Here's my
change.org.
Sign my petition. Yeah, my change.org petition. And the reason I partially think that is we talk about this all the time, right? Time and place. I think that Sea of Thieves being a first party game, like live service game that was made entirely under first party ownership and released entirely under first party ownership, I think that the news of that game hitting PlayStation has opened the door of possibility for a lot of people. And I think some of the Xbox people who do want to play Helldivers are like, if Microsoft will let Sea of Thieves go to them, why can't we also hope that PlayStation gives their game to us? And I think it's, I get where you reach that mindset, but I think, as you kind of talked about, like Microsoft and Sony are in very different positions in the gaming industry. Like you kind of answered the fact that in many ways, Xbox have proclaimed that they've lost the console war insofar as it was something that they could win. Now I think it's more like they're adapting to their place in the console hierarchy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, look, that's just some ideas. Of course, there's more that could be said, but let's hear what you guys have to say. So, Jehudi MD, one of our longtime listeners, longtime patrons, he says it's a difficult question to answer. On the one hand, the success of Helldivers 2 and how it performed equally on PC makes you wonder if they'll be aggressive with either releasing day and date with PC in the future and how their live service game market will be like. On the other hand, they have a dedicated fan base who buys their consoles in droves, but we all know how finicky fan bases can be, and any decision by PlayStation can sway outcomes either way. Interesting near-term future we are looking at for sure. I think that's well put.
Mm-hmm.
Sony's kind of in a little bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't position, which I think any company of this size arguably is always in.
Yeah.
So it's
true.
The nature of it. Yeah. GromKid1989 over in the Discord says they have to just stick to what they've done in the past. Make fantastic story games, add multiplayer in certain games that make sense to the game, but don't force it. And maybe not every game has to be 50, 60, 70-hour games. Short and sweet sometimes work just as good. Look at Uncharted Lost Legacy, one of the best Uncharted games, but also the shortest.
Facts.
Lost Legacy is an incredible game. I like how we constantly say it on this show, but it's true. Lost Legacy is an incredible game. It's very good.
The best Uncharted game.
I think it's the best Uncharted game from a pure gameplay standpoint, and that's something that Uncharted didn't always have the ability to say. That's how you look at it, right?
Yeah.
And it is short and sweet. I like that answer. I constantly wonder whether we'll see Sony kind of go back to the God of War 3 and Uncharted, even Uncharted 4. Uncharted 4 was a longer game than most Uncharted games. Because at that point, they couldn't do a 12-hour Uncharted game because the 6 to 8 hour The Order 1886 the year prior got its fucking ass ate, and not in the way that you want.
Right. Exactly.
So Yeah. Last one we have here that we're going to do is from Rude Days 93, another one of our patrons and long listeners. He says, I don't think this is quite in contrast. He goes, I don't think they'll be able to copy Nintendo now. Nintendo can make budget-friendly games and keep all their games at full price years after release. Sony, I believe, will continue to expand outside the console, making a PlayStation launcher on PC, launching an app on phones and TVs, soon releasing their own handheld. Just like how Microsoft expanded their ecosystem, I see Sony continuing along those lines as the years go by. I think I agree with this on a never say never scale, kind of like what we talked about. I think that it's impossible to ever look and go, there's no future in which Sony may do this. It's clearly there's a possibility. One thing I thought was interesting, though, is I think he's right in the fact that Nintendo does probably better than anyone in the industry at doing first-party games in a budgeted manner. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'd say that Sony can't do it at all, though. And this is a little bit of a cheat because it's technically a second-party game, but pretty much everything that we have to go off of, Helldivers was not an expensive game to make. Helldivers 2 specifically was not an expensive game to make.
It was not.
So, and that game is paying off in droves right now. So I think if Sony can learn the right lessons from their games that are cheaper and smaller that do well, I think they could start to whittle their games back to a place of better cost from a production standpoint to what their ability to make money is. It's just, the question becomes, will they not have me climbing a mountain for 20 minutes in the next God of War game because they need to make sure that the game is 40 hours? Because if not, then you'll say, well, why the fuck did I spend $70 on this 40-hour game? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like that's what it comes down to. I mean, like, I think Spider-Man 2 is a really interesting example of a Sony game actually having a main story that's pretty short and mostly getting okay. But even then, some people bitched about the fact that Spider-Man's like a 13-hour game.
Yeah, I mean, it feels short for a $70 game, but it was worth the money. So, it depends on you.
Yeah, I think everybody knows as much as it may not be what everyone wants, and that's fine. But speaking for myself, if you give me an incredible, crazy well-produced, very well-paced, making sure that there's very little waste in this, if you can do that, or it doesn't have to be waste, but as long as you're doing it in a way where at the end I feel like, holy shit, I just experienced something, I don't care if it's $70. Give it to me.
Oh, I agree.
8 hour, $70 game? Fuck yeah. If I feel like it's worth it, that's all that matters.
That's 8 hours is crazy, but I get what you mean.
Look, I get your point, but it's just to extrapolate to say if you've got a game that can really do something, I would much rather have a game with no fluff that aims to tell its story.
It's one of those things. Again, it's you could have a 30-minute game that's worth $70. It's just execution. So
yeah, well, and I think it's important to say, like, some games have fluff in a way that I enjoy. I'm not trying to say every game with fluff is not good. I just think that we've reached a point where fluff feels like a necessity in gaming, whereas I don't think at one point it really was. I think it used to. They weren't afraid. They were like, no, if this isn't really adding to the story or the gameplay, one of the two main pillars of a game, then we're just not worried about it. He's like, why would we add this? I mean, I genuinely mean this when I say I don't think anyone played Spider-Man 2, did that fucking spray paint mini game, and was like, yeah, this was totally worth the extra hour I just put into this game for this. I don't think that that's the case.
No, I think it's one of those things where once you raise the price of something, you have to justify it, and we can talk about inflation and rising costs and how games have been stagnant in pricing since like the PS2 era, and they needed to go up and budgets are going up. Nobody gives a shit. Right,
it doesn't.
Yeah,
it's you raised it by $10. What are you giving me in exchange for this?
I don't want to have a debate about this, but one of the things that made me laugh over the last week that I've been off this show is the people having a cow about layoffs in the video game industry and being super angry that Nintendo shut down an emulator. You cannot hold both opinions. Right? You cannot be upset about layoffs and go, Nintendo just removed my ability to steal Legends of Zelda before it comes out. You can't have both thoughts. It's that same kind of argument to me.
Which that's such a in-depth topic, and I'm not saying we're going to go into it here because I don't have the mental constitution for it right now. But if you're ever interested, I think you should look into a number of different people's opinions and kind of see how even creators view piracy. And I think you'd be surprised at how often people that you may have expected to have problems with it don't, and how times that you think that they probably wouldn't have a problem with it do. It's really interesting to hear everyone's reasonings. One of the ones that I always go to because I think it's an interesting thing, Neil Gaiman, the guy who wrote is it Sandman or whatever? I never actually watched it.
Yep,
so,
Sandman, American Gods, Norse mythology.
Yeah, so he wrote Sandman, and he was talking about how, or Sandman, whatever it's called. And there's an interview where he's actually talking about how at first he was terrified of piracy because of the way that he had understood it as just a consumer himself, right? And the scare around the internet at the early internet days of what piracy is and what it means and how it's theft. And he's gone towards saying that he kind of knew it was inevitable that the book would end up hitting online, and that once it did, at first he was like, I'm done. There's just no way I'll be able to make it as a living in this. And he said that the weirdest thing happened, that the book hit online, and he was sure that it was any day that the sales would just slow to a trickle. And instead, the book hit online. People started reading it. People thought it was great.
Yeah.
And then people started buying it because they got to read it and find out that it was great, and then bought it to finish it, or bought it after they finished it because they were like, he deserves the money. I want to have a copy of this. I'll reread it. And then the word of mouth from people who actually read the book got so high that even the people who didn't convert to a sale from piracy got people to go buy the book by positive word of mouth. And I'm not saying that this is an inherent benefit or that piracy is always good or it's always bad or anything. I just think it's really interesting to do a deep dive into what piracy is, and the fact that technically speaking, it is not illegal. It's really weird. It's not illegal, but you can still be sued for it. It's incredibly complicated to get into. That's why I say I don't have the mental constitution for this right now. But if you have any inclination of interest in the topic, even if you think it's bad, it's worth just diving into, because I think you'd be surprised at things you might learn, even if it just cements your opinion. It's interesting seeing some of the layers of it that you may have never thought.
I always just find the arguments disingenuous. Like, I'm sorry, it's not a preservation issue that an emulator doesn't work. It's just not real. It's not preservation.
I think I have a complicated one with that, because I think it depends on what the emulator is. I think Nintendo shutting down a Switch emulator right now makes perfect sense. The Switch is an active console that all the games are still available for, and there's no way in hell that this is a preservation issue. Now, Nintendo going after fucking NES, and I think they don't, clearly.
Right.
But Nintendo going after an NES emulator right now kind of feels like, why are you even wasting the effort? And they don't, because they don't do that. And I think at that point, there are games that would be lost to time if people didn't just have copies of them sitting on their computer that could be played in an emulator. Whether or not that's inherently valuable is just a question of who you are as an individual.
Well, all I mean is that me, with my shelf of games back there, is doing more for preservation than somebody downloading a ROM of Super Mario 2 is. That's all I'm saying.
I think it's a version of right. I think yours is a more pure version of preservation. Yeah. Theirs is like, it's still the game. It is a form of preservation, but it's not the game in its original format. I much prefer yours. I like the idea of like, no, I'm going to play a PS3 game and I'm going to play it on PS3.
Right.
Like I'm going to crack the disc open or have the game still on my hard drive, and I'm going to play it in its original format on its original hardware, all the bumps and bruises and everything. And there's something that's fun about that, because it's like, it feels more like connected. Is it cool that you can play the original Demon's Souls in 4K 60 on a fucking computer? Yeah, it's cool. But I kind of like that Demon's Souls look like there's a remake for that now. Or you can go play the PS3 version in its PS3 glory, 720p, 24 frames per second. Like, it's, so I think yours is cool because yours has a romanticization to it that's fun.
Yeah.
It feels cool to reconnect with something that you have a good history with and be like, bro, I got the PS3 running. Look at this. I know that you've enjoyed playing the PS3 games on your more modern controllers, but I actually really liked the other day whenever I was playing, or it's been a while now, but when I was playing Wanted, and for some reason the Defender just wouldn't be consistently working, so I did pull out my white DualShock 3, and I was like, it feels cooler playing this with a DualShock 3 for some reason. Like, yeah, it's annoying here and there, but it feels genuine in a way that's hard to replicate.
I actually agree, but I've gone through dual shocks, so I'm not buying.
Yeah, they're getting lost to time, dude. Like that's
they're expensive. The problem is there's cheap.
So many fakes on the market
because they're all fake. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I'm actually pretty sure the one I have is fake. That's why it's broken already. Either way, man. Is there news and stuff?
There is news.
My
and
dogs
stuff,
are barking,
Chris.
so.
Oh, okay. Well, let's move through this. First piece is real quick, real easy. PS Plus Extra and Premium games for March are available now and include bigger games such as NBA 2K24, Resident Evil 3's remake, and Marvel Midnight Suns, as well as some middle-sized games such as Dragon Ball Z Kakarot and a remaster of an indie puzzler, Mystic Pillars, and more on the extra tier. While if you go to the Premium tier, subscribers at that level get access to a lesser-known Jak and Daxter title by the way of PSP, technically also PS2 game, Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier, with Monster Hunter like God's Eater Burst joining as another PSP classic, and beloved PS1 classic Cool Borders, bringing retro snowboarder action to you, as well as Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney trilogy from PS4 joining, and a couple others. There's a fighter game for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And here's an interesting wrinkle. It's not that we haven't seen this at all, but Sony capping this off is leveraging its anime prowess with PS Plus by adding My Hero Academia's first season to Sony Pictures Core, which, if you don't know, is a streaming service that's included in PS Plus and has access to a number of shows and movies in Sony's catalog for free for PS Plus subscribers. The rest of them that are on there, you might have to buy, like Gran Turismo and whatnot. But I think it's interesting that Sony like bought Crunchyroll, bought Funimation, all these things, and they're just kind of like, yeah, we're gonna try and entice you into these by being like, watch My Hero Academia for free. Maybe you'll like it and then want to join Crunchyroll. You know?
Yeah.
It's good synergy.
All I have to say is, for the love of God, somebody just play Midnight Suns. Look. I recommend a lot of games. I say a lot of shit. There has not been one person who has taken my recommendation of Midnight Suns and come back and been like, that game was bad. There has not been one person who didn't like it that I have recommended that game to. So just go play the goddamn game. It's so good. Okay? So good.
My hope from looking at this is that the fact that they did, it's a little crazy they did it first, but the fact that they did Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier gives me hope, but also questions as to why they wouldn't start here for Ready at Dawn's Daxter, standalone Daxter PSP game. It is an incredible fucking game.
That was one of the one games I had, on PSP.
It is an incredible game, and I would love to play it again, get the platinum. I'll actually try this game again. I never beat this one. I did play it. Time and place thing. I just wasn't feeling it enough to want to stick with it over, I can't remember, God of War, Ghost of Sparta or something that was around that same time. So there's that. But Chris, I'm glad you brought up recommendations and of course your strong recommendation. And a lot of people have listened to you and decided to go and try Marvel Midnight Sun. But we have a question from Matt Green, one of our patrons, who went over to patreon.com/Nartech and gave as little as $1 per month to support the show, just like you can. He says, how much stock do me and you, put into reviews or recommendations on games? I've just started Suicide Squad, and it's nowhere near as bad as I'd heard, although my expectations were low to start with. And I think it's important to say. So I want to start with this. Like, we've said a lot about Suicide Squad in the show, but I haven't played it. Chris has played it. Chris had far stronger words than I did. But I think we've also kind of understood, we're not saying the game's like a 2 out of 10.
No.
It's just it's like a 6 out of 10 probably, or a 7 out of 10. That's not compelling enough to pull you away from something else for most people, or at least for Chris. And I think that's fair. And looking at it, it looks like a 6 or 7 out of 10. And some of my favorite games are 6 and 7s out of 10. But that one didn't look compelling enough to pull me off of something else to also deal with where its quality wavers. So with that in mind, Chris, we've had like very short conversations about it, but it's been a while about how you and I choose to take in reviews and recommendations. So considering we give them to people, how much stock do you personally put into recommendations?
It depends on who's giving me the recommendation. Like if you recommend me something 9 times out of 10, it's at least on my radar now.
Sure.
And that's one of the things with me is I try to avoid recommending. Like I'll come to you and be like, "Hey, game's good. This game, I really like this game. You should give it a shot." But like, very rarely am I like, "Brett, you need to play this game. You will like it."
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
And I've been right.
And I think
most of
every
the time
that you have, I don't think you've missed. Like, I didn't stick with certain games just because I had too much going on. Like, I still think Signalis. I still think I would actually like that game if I would give it the time to go back to it. And I did like what I played of it.
Yeah.
I just couldn't stick with it. But I think you were right. It's my type of game. It just wasn't the right time for me to be playing it. So, yeah, you're right. I don't think you've given me a recommendation where you've actually said, I think you need to play this. And I've not been like, oh, hell yeah, this is cool. This is good.
Right. And that's where I'm at. Like,
so is it the benefit of knowing that the person knows you and your gaming proclivities?
Yeah, I think that's one of those things, right? Where people listening to the show who listen every week, they know the kind of gamer that I am and the games that I do like. So if I say, this week you look at something if you've listened to the show, every year I spend 300 hours on MLB. And if you're like, he's talking about Unicorn Overlord, I don't know. But then I look at you and go, I played 50 hours of this and I've barely touched MLB. That to me would be something where if I was listening to, like, let's say Colin say that about something, if he put a game over Far Cry, I'd be like, oh shit, okay, maybe I should give that a shot. But I also know his tastes and our tastes are not similar. So I do tend to take a lot of what he says with a grain of salt. So it's just about knowing your audience. I know that I align with Skill Up more than I don't. So if he puts something on my radar and says it's good, I'm more likely to give that game a shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, like,
and we've often said that about, like, I like ACG and I often agree with his takes on games, or if I don't agree with them, I usually at least respect them. I'm like, I get where he got from, even if I ended up enjoying this game and he didn't really. The only time, it's always my go-to joke, the only time I think I've ever just been like, wow, were you wrong, was Days Gone.
Yeah.
His Days Gone review, I'm just like, we have played totally different games somehow. But that's okay. So, with that in mind, I think you brought up an interesting thing of us as the podcasters. I think you and I offering each other games and then kind of being able to go through and, like, I know what you like, you know what I like, so we can suggest games to each other, and it usually works. I think what gets weird is that we're also on the flip side where we're often suggesting games, but we're suggesting games to a broad audience, not an isolated individual like me saying, Chris, I think you would like this game. Instead, we're often urging people like, hey, I don't know what type of games you like, but I think Marvel's Midnight Sun's a great game. So I think you should still play it. Mm-hmm. And there's still value in that. But it's our job at the end of that to try and explain what we liked about the game, what the type of game is, and then for you to hopefully extrapolate, does that game even sound like something remotely in my ballpark? And once I know this seems like something I could enjoy, and he seems to think it's an excellent version of this, what I could enjoy, it's worth trying.
It's one of those things.
Whereas if we don't do a good job of explaining it, then that's on us. We can say play Marvel's Midnight Suns all day, but if you don't even know what the fuck it is, that is a pretty hollow recommendation.
Right. And that's another thing to look at, right? Like, I can tell you Midnight Suns is great as much as I want, but if you don't like card games, you're not going to like Midnight Suns.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of knowing it. It's one of those, I try and be relatively light with the games I recommend strongly, other than saying, hey, I really like this. Because I like to have that. I like to have, like, when I go to you and I say, you need to play this because you will like it. I would imagine at this point, you're like, yeah, I'll probably give that a shot because he's normally right. Which is why I give Blake so much shit about RRR, because I'm like, dude, it's a 3-hour movie. I hate 3-hour movies, and I've watched that 3 times. Go watch the fucking movie. But it's that kind of thing for me where it's like, if I'm recommending something, especially to someone, I'm like, okay, even with like Sean is a different thing, because I'm like, Sean, I know that you will adore Unicorn Overlord, and I will have the platinum before you touch it, and you will still lecture me on the game. But I know you well enough to know you're not going to play it until it's $20. So when it's $20, make sure you get. That's exactly what I said to him. And in a year, when he gets it for $20 and he's in love with it, I'm be like, I told you again. Now buy it for $60 because I'm never wrong.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. Like, Helldivers was a good example where he was like, nah. And then it's like playing it for 2 minutes. I was like, Sean would fucking love this game.
Yeah. Yeah, and he tried to avoid it, and we broke him down.
Yeah, and of course, as soon as he started playing it, I'll be on my PlayStation like, this man's playing so much Helldivers because that's who he is, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely,
it's funny. Yeah, it's sometimes you need that. So I think Matt, to go towards your thing, like I put a lot of stock in it, so long as I know that the person. So if I'm listening to someone and I'm acting as a non-live participant, I just know over time of this is actually my process, and I do this a lot. Most of the time, I don't really. Be dead honest with you, I don't even really look at reviews very often at all. I pretty much know if I am aware of a game before it comes out, I pretty much know what the chances of me liking it are, and then it's just a matter of how strong is the pull for me to want to explore that over what else is currently on the table, and it's a battle of that. I hardly ever read reviews because there's been so many games that I thought looked good, and then I ended up playing them, and this is my process. After I've played the game and have my own opinion and I love it and I know what I'm doing or I know what its weaknesses and strengths are, then I go to people and I'll look at their reviews and I'll see how close their view of that game aligned to what I thought of the game. And I'll do that for a few games. And once it seems like often enough that we're landing in a similar spot, then I'll start looking at them for games I've never played and don't know about. And I'll go, okay, so these 7 games, we were pretty much tit for tat on. We had a pretty similar experience, pretty similar thought process. Now I'm going to see what they think about Yakuza 8, a game I've never messed with, never played, don't know if I do want to play. All right, now I can know how their proclivity, and it doesn't mean it's always going to be right, but that's my process. And as rare as it is, most of the time when I'm watching reviews, it's really to see how other people thought of something that I just played, good or bad.
It's the same for me, where I'll be like, oh, I really loved Unicorn Overlord. Let me listen to 50,000 YouTube videos about it now. That's how I go. It's weird because
I already know that I like the game, so why am I listening to 3 different reviews of this game? And you just kind of want to what is everyone else feeling? What's the temperature from everyone else?
It's funny because I did that with Fallout 3. Like I just finished it, and then I watched legitimately every video essay on Fallout on YouTube. I'm not even kidding. I don't think there's one I haven't listened to. And it's awesome because I just like hearing people go like especially when I'm listening to stuff like that. It's like I like when people are like, oh, I had this moment, and oh, I did too, and this is how that moment played up. It's stuff like that. So with recommendations, again, it's just a matter of I hope as long as you know me well enough, I'm good for it.
Yeah, my general thing is as long as you have money to play with, and spending this 30, 40, 20, 60, whatever the fucking price of the game ends up being. If you've got money to play with and it's not going to hurt your ability to survive and live, I'm very much of the opinion if a game, however it gets mentioned in a podcast, you see an ad, anything, whatever it is, and it kind of makes you go, I wonder if I'd like that game. Just look at it. Look at screenshots. Look at quick gameplay videos. And I'm not even kidding, I usually make the decision to buy a game within 30 seconds or less.
Mm-hmm. That's how it was with Unicorn Overlord, because I wasn't going to pick it up. It was like, I got Dragon's Dogma, I got all these games I want to play. Nothing was hitting. And then I watched 5 minutes of a video, and I was like, this is what I want to play. And I was right.
Yeah. And it depends. It's not always, but I think most games quickly seeing and a game trailer is a good example because it's trying to boil down the essence of what they think the game is worth and how they're wanting to portray the game into something that's brief. And usually I can figure out whether or not I like a game. Some games are marketed terribly and their trailers do not do a good job of explaining the game. Or sometimes the trailers are obtuse on purpose because they're trying to hide the fact that the game is going to play with you, like Inscription or something. And that's fun. And that's what makes me want to play it. Okay, I see that it is a card game. I like card games. Clearly something else is going on here. I'm just going to fucking dive in. And that's all you need. That's the kind of thing. So I think that's a good way to approach it. Don't ever take recommendations from someone who you don't know what their gaming taste is. That's the most important thing. You can enjoy listening to someone even when you don't agree with their gaming takes. Just like you said, you listen to a lot of Colin stuff, and it's like that your game taste, even though you enjoy listening to Colin, your taste don't align. So it's like take every recommendation with a grain of salt. It may at least get you to look into the game more than you would have, but
absolutely.
All right, moving on. Next thing is a quick one. What's up?
I'm just going to go get ice while you read this. I'll be right back.
Go for it. The late Akira Toriyama's Sandland game, previously revealed at Summer Game Fest 2023, has received a free demo of the title to try before you buy when the game launches on April 26th. For players who do try the demo, if they grab the full release, they will be rewarded with a decent sum of upgrade materials for the game's vehicles, which play a central role in the gameplay. If you haven't seen any of the gameplay, I think it's pretty obvious that vehicles, tanks, cars, all those things are clearly meant to play a big role in this. So, if you're interested in that at all, I think this is a cool way to do it. And I think it's a fun way to kind of extra motivate you to not only play the demo, but maybe even go ahead and buy the game because of the fact that you're going to get some kind of currency that you can end up using. I think that's a cool way to go about this. I don't think Chris is going to have too much to say about this, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one, which I think is a little bit more interesting. And that is in regards to digital codes popping up for PlayStation in stores. So with that in mind, after removing digital codes for game releases from retailer stores in 2019, PlayStation has decided to shake things up a bit in that regard, likely in an effort to draw more interest to its PSVR 2, which we will talk about in a minute, as game codes have returned to storefronts, but with the twist that so far the only games available in this banner are games that are either for PSVR 2 exclusively or include a substantial VR component such as Gran Turismo 7, Resident Evil 8, and the like. So that one's interesting. Chris, I'll give you a quick second. Do you have anything you want to add about Sandland?
Looks great. R.I.P. Toriyama.
Yep. That's where I'm at. I think it does look cool. I want to try it. I don't know if I'll try the demo because to add on to that conversation we are just having, I hardly ever play demos either. I just look at the game and go, it looks cool. I'm going to buy it.
Yeah, never.
Devil may care attitude, real. So going back into this, Chris, I don't know if you remember. I remember very clearly being, reading as I was walking down an aisle at work, being like, I can't buy PlayStation game codes on Amazon or anything like that anymore. Interesting. And it's really weird to see this back in such a limited fashion. Because I don't even necessarily, let's just say it has to do with PSVR 2, which we're going to talk about literally next. Actually, let's go ahead and do it. So to tie into that, just a year after launch, PSVR 2 has apparently massively undersold expectations. Bloomberg has been reporting that Sony has stopped manufacturing units until they've sold through their stockpile. The launch support for PSVR 2 has been rocky at best, with only 2 games coming from Sony first party since launch. Whether third-party titles like Metro Awakening can pull interest enough will have to be seen, but this isn't a great sign for the peripheral. So kind of going back to this digital codes thing, I don't know if I even follow the thought process of having digital codes sit on store shelves like Target or whatever, where you see the games hanging. I assume that the thought process is you may see a game hanging there, see that it's VR compatible because they have a very big logo on it that says PSVR 2, and it may just kind of be like, oh, I didn't know that there was a Resident Evil game in VR. That's a big game. That's a full game. I thought VR was just roller coaster simulations. Like, is that the thought process, or what do you think's the thing here? Because it seems very weird to pull back into doing this just for PSVR 2 when, if you don't know, the clear benefit of not selling those games through other places is that you get the full cut unimpeded if you buy the game from them, and they have full control over return policies and all those things. So what do you think's going on?
I wish I could tell you. The most likely scenario is they had these and they're just desperate to get someone to buy them. That's the only thing I can think of, because I really do not see why you would want to buy these or want to sell these from another retailer. Doesn't make sense to me. So it really seems like the right move would be to not do this.
So I wish there was more information with this, and I'm sure there's probably a way to kind of find this and couple this information together. But I think if you take this move and you add in context that we're doing this, but what we're also doing is at physical brick and mortar retailers, we're going to have it to where anywhere they have Oculus set up with on an end cap, on the end cap beside it, or whatever in close proximity, we're going to have PSVR 2 front and center, and we're going to have these game cards for PSVR 2. That way we're getting the ability to draw some of the market attention that is happening with Oculus Quest 3 right now, and you just might be able to convince someone to go, oh shit, I already have a PS5. and this PSVR 2 will just work with it. And I can play Gran Turismo and Resident Evil. Cool. I didn't realize this. And hopefully get somebody to buy in who was just blissfully unaware.
Yeah.
That still seems like, 10% chance of buy through. And that's probably being a little generous, if I'm being honest.
It seems like, they put the candy.
But it makes more sense to say that you're doing it in conjunction with making sure that you're getting better product placement in brick and mortar stores.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the same thing as when they put the candy at the cash register. It's one of those like, oop, you know what? I could use a Snickers today. Oh gosh, I'd love a Reese's. It's that kind of thing. It's like, oh, I would like to play Walking Dead Saints and Sinners 2, Chapter 2, VR edition. Like, yeah. I think that's...
See, but here's the thing. I'm with you if you already have a PSVR 2. That's a 30, 50, 40, depending on the game, dollar impulse buy, which I think is a lot easier to get people to do. And I'll tell you, I'm in a weird position where I have enough money to impulse buy $500 things. I think you do too. We often talk about this. Like,
yes.
You bought PSVR 2 as an impulse buy. I bought my Series X as an impulse buy. I've been thinking about Oblivion, and I was walking through Walmart when it was really hard to get Series X's, and they had one sitting on the shelf behind the cashier, and I was like, no fucking way. And I was like, fuck it. I've got $400 sitting around, $500. I was like, fuck it, I'll buy it. And so not everyone is, but you buying the game does not guarantee you're going to buy this $550 peripheral. And so I get you, but do you really think that there's enough people who are going to look at these game cards and go, oh shit, this game and this PSVR 2, I'll buy the PSVR 2 and go ahead and buy this download code as a now total $600 before tax impulse buy?
No.
Here's a real question. Do you think very many people at all are buying VR as an entire market? Do you think very many people buy VR as a impulse buy?
No.
Or do you think that's really I'm doing a lot of fucking research to figure out if I want to invest?
I don't think it's a lot of research, but again, I think it depends on price. Like PSVR is not an impulse buy, but you could sell me on Quest being an impulse buy. I mean, it's not that much more or less expensive, but I don't know. I think the thing is for me, right, in my head, if you're in this section to see these,
sure,
you're already a little bit on the fence towards buying it. You're at the very least in that section, right? Like if I'm looking at the game cards for PS5, I'm probably in the PS5 section. So I mean, depending on how this is, there you go. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't think this really means anything. I don't know that this is all that crazy.
I think it's only crazy because it completely goes against what they decided years ago, and it's not even a complete, turnaround because it's not like you can go buy God of War Ragnarok in this capacity. You can only buy VR. So you seem to think there has to be some thought process behind this, and that's something that I guess as a consumer, we're not seeing the numbers that bear out that this is probably a good idea. Even if it's a last ditch, if we get lucky, 5% of people will maybe buy a PSVR 2 from it. That's still 5% of people to move back stock that you're sitting on.
Yeah.
But that almost seems like, hey, we're announcing this alongside a $50 price drop. You can get it for $500 instead of $550. It's something that might move you in the direction,
Yeah, and listen, it could just be as simple as we hope somebody buys this because it's non-refundable, and they go, well, shit, I need this. It could be that simple. Like, it really could be. I don't know, but I don't know. I don't know. I mean, they're selling game cards. Like, they're probably just desperate to sell PSVR 2, and putting this out in people's faces is just another way to be like, PSVR 2 exists. Hey, here's this cool game called Walking Dead. You know The Walking Dead, right? It's got Carl. So it's
Yeah. This is a quick thing that I thought was interesting. So one of our listeners, or at least listeners of the past, who knows if he still listens or not, but I still, chatted up with him on Twitter here and there. Richard Schaefer, he's really big into VR. He has Quest VR, he's got PC VR, he's got PSVR 2, and he had PSVR 1. He likes to play all these. And he was kind of talking about, the VR woes. And he was talking about and I thought it was interesting. I considered it like a low stakes way for Sony to approach extra support for their VR. Is there's a new publisher or whatever you want to call them, a new studio coming around called Flat to VR Studios. And their whole idea is that they make officially licensed ports of what is otherwise games that were made for a traditional flat screen experience. And we've seen a lot of companies do this with Skyrim, Borderlands, all these different things. But this is a company that's otherwise doing it. So they're doing like Doom, Quake 3 Arena, Half-Life 2 VR. These are some of the things they've already worked on or is coming up. And so what he said is that if Sony just wanted a way to kind of be able to do this, go to Flat to VR, create a partnership with them where you give them some of your flat screen VR games, The Last of Us Part 2, and you go, make this a VR game. And I would even like to see them do it as a one-off. You just go to them and go, we want to do one game so we can see how this partnership works. You know, how much money are we going to give you to do this? Are we just going to throw it off in your hands? Whatever it be. Is it going to be like a Helldivers 2 situation where we give you access to the stuff and we pay you, but we don't own you. Therefore, we don't incur any of the risk outside of the cost to make the game. And go take one game that you seem passionate that you think could make this work and make it in VR. It would be a weird way where if it worked and Sony could keep being like, hey, buy PSVR 2 because now you can play Days Gone in VR.
I would do that.
Right? And then you go, hey, buy it because now you can play The Order 1886 in VR. I don't fucking even care at this point. Just a game that has more first-party production values that you'd expect and has that kind of quality and, more importantly, name recognition. And go, yeah, we want to see these in VR. Like, I think it's cool that Metro is coming to VR because Metro is a big enough name that people might go, oh, I might fuck with VR if I get to play another Metro game. I haven't really considered it, but I like this series. Whereas if the only things you're coming out with are new IP or very super niche IP, no one's going to really, kind of like you talked about with, you don't think anybody's, you know, not enough people are going to buy a PlayStation for Helldivers 2. That's probably the same for not enough people are going to buy a PSVR 2 just because you made, I don't even know a niche IP to throw at it, but you know.
I don't know. You kind of led me into my biggest point is, sorry to offend VR fans. I don't think Sony should spend any more money on PSVR. They should just move on.
Interesting. At this point, I wonder how much they consider it to be. They've invested too much to do that, or you know, like are they stuck in a like a? I call it the lost time fallacy, where like you keep going because you feel like you've invested enough time. But
yeah,
is it really just? Is it the lost money fallacy? Is it like we've invested? You know what I really think it is, and I think I may have even said this on an episode not super long ago. I think it's that Sony has invested early into things and then kind of slowed their investment, and then those things ended up taking off down the road, and Sony's like, damn it, we could have done that. We could have been there. I think that they may just keep investing in it because if VR does take off, they already want to have a foothold in it.
Yeah, but I'm not saying not to R&D it, but I don't see the rationale behind, I don't know, paying 10 million, 20 million to get The Last of Us in VR. Like, I just don't see it. It's VR is not selling. Like, if they're going to invest money, invest it in fucking games, because this didn't work. And R&D it, have someone who's the VR guy who's always on the cutting edge. And you know what? When he goes, hey, I got a way to make this $199, no wires, that's when you bring it back out. But right now, it's an expensive niche product that's not selling. You're not supporting. So why are we pouring more money into it? I'm just talking as a business.
Well, arguably they're not. So to your point.
Yeah. I mean, that's
there's no evidence to state otherwise. The only thing they're doing is marketing. That's clearly what this thing we were just talking about. This is just marketing. They're trying to at least move backstock. They're spending money to try and make the money they've already spent for production back.
Yeah, I'm not saying completely divest from VR. I think it would behoove them to stay in that part of the field. But I think you just pack it up and go, we fucked up. It's a cool collector's item. You've got that VR. Enjoy it. but we're done investing in it in this generation.
So basically, Vita it. Like, if you still want to make games for it, you can.
Yeah, because
But
that's
otherwise,
what
we're
they're
not going to
doing
make any more first party content.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's what it
that's all
seems
they're
like, at least.
doing. So, like, what is it? Just rip the Band-Aid off. Just apologize. Whatever. Give us a free game on the PSN store and move on with our lives.
And my whole thing is, if they're not truly done and they're just going to keep spending money in weird ways, if you're going to spend money anyway, might as well throw it at having someone take one of your big games and make it into a VR version. But if you're not, then I agree. If you're not, then just say that, cut the money and run. Not that that's going to be anybody loves that. I mean, no one loved that when they did it with Vita in terms of people who bought the device.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to buy a device and then a year or two in basically be told, yeah, we're not going to officially support it anymore. But if that's what you're going to do, just get it out of the way. But, Sony didn't even do that with Vita. They basically just let it slow bleed and never officially said they weren't doing anything, but just never did anything. So
exactly.
It's fine. Let's move on to the next piece of news we have here. This one's pretty interesting. Former PlayStation executive Connie Booth, who was one of the main people responsible for building and maintaining the company's first-party strategy before being allegedly fired last year after 30 years with the company, is back with a new job in the industry. So IGN reports that she is joining EA to oversee its studios amidst the recently detailed restructure. As someone who had a hand in many of PlayStation's most beloved games, Booth will apparently be, quote, group manager for action RPGs, and will oversee projects such as BioWare's upcoming titles, Dragon Age, Mass Effect, as well as EA Motive's Iron Man, and hopefully, potentially, the Dead Space 2 remake if they continue going down that route, as well as Cliffhanger's Black Panther title. This points to EA really putting its money where its mouth is and wanting to adhere to one of its new pillars that they're trying to work off of blockbuster storytelling, and seems to fit in well with the projects that EA has decided to keep around in the process of this restructure, as opposed to what we've seen other publishers push toward with a stronger lean into live services. So across the board, this is interesting to me because so many of the big publishers have been being like, no, we're going to go live service, and EA has live service. But I think Connie Booth is a very specific hire to try and communicate a very specific future for what EA hopes to do. And most of the games they've kept along are story-driven single-player games. So, Chris, what do you think is happening at EA that they're seeing this as being a more viable future than what we're seeing with Warner Brothers kind of being like, no, that's too risky. We want to kind of minimize our investment in that and maximize it in something else. Do you think it's just EA seeing the value of being different from the rest of the publishers who are seemingly moving toward that? Or is it just the right management making the right moves for this type of gaming?
I think it's probably the right management making the right type of moves. I mean, the big thing to remember with EA is they have Apex Legends, something a lot of other publishers do not have. That makes
they already have their live service game.
Right. Makes this a lot easier for them. I mean, they have EA and they're fucking EA. They have EAFC. They have Madden. Like, it makes a ton of sense.
Soon to be NCAA.
Yep, soon to be NCAA. So it makes a ton of sense to focus on the single player games you are making while you're humming along on your other stuff. So it seems that simple to me. And Connie Booth's good at her job, so good for her.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting is one of our patrons, No Fate, longtime listener, he said it begs the question of why is she leaving PlayStation? And I think it points to the fact that a lot of people don't know Connie Booth is, if we're being honest, right? The vast majority of PlayStation owners have no clue who Connie Booth is. But even people who may have known who she was at various points in time didn't even know that she left. If you're to believe David Jaffe, she was fired. And if you're to believe him even further, she was fired because all of the blame of Jim Ryan pushing for live service games that, as far as we can tell from behind the scenes, doesn't seem to be panning out quite the way that Sony had hoped, fell on her. Now, that's a lot of ifs that we will never know the full answers to.
I thought I'd read that she disagreed with Jim, and that's why she got fired.
that might be the case. All I'm saying is that this is specifically Jaffe, and this is what he said. So take how much you believe him. Which I actually, in that case, believe him. He often talks about Scott Rhodey and a lot of the people in the back end decision making process at Sony, and he always had great things to say about Connie Booth. So I believe that he believes that. Whether or not it's actually what happened, I don't think he's out here lying so much as he's just spreading the version that he understands it to be. So who knows? But it does kind of coil back in nicely to the fact that Sony said they were pushing even further in the live service, and Connie Booth leaves, and EA, who, as far as we can see, is not trying to push any further into live service since they have their golden child with Apex, and instead is trying to restructure the rest of the company around being more profitable with its single player games. It's all just to say it's an interesting series of events around this, and one that I think is smart. And if anything, I've often been hit or miss on EA because they have a bunch of decisions they've made in the past that have been kind of weird, and they've often been a company that has been coupled with and kind of synonymous with aggressive microtransactions. So for them to try and rebrand themselves into this single player driven games first and foremost is an interesting move that, if it goes out well, I like this. This gives me more hope for the future of EA than I'd had probably the last 3 or so years up until Dead Space remake was incredible, and a couple of other games. Like if Dragon Age lands and works, and they're working in the right direction. BioWare's starting, if that works for BioWare, they'll start to get some of their cachet back as a developer that they've arguably lost.
Yeah.
So
I hope this is successful for them.
Yeah, it just seems like a lot of money. So I guess it's more of how much is what we're hearing from the other publishers a reality across the industry versus a reality for that publisher as an individual? And that's really hard to kind of ear out without having very specific info from their numbers. But we do have a question that came from Rude Days 93, one of our patrons, who it kind of ties into this, because I think it ties into our discussion that we've had around Bungie and how much they do or don't influence what's happening with Sony and their live service push, or potentially their pull away from some of that live service. He says a lot of news swirling around Bungie right now, from rumors of PlayStation regretting the purchase to a new director being hired for their Matter game. Where do you see them in 5 years from now? Are they still with Sony? Are they independent once more? Or are they closed down? I haven't been following this hard, so I don't really know exactly what the scuttlebutt is around it. But I know the internet, even us, sometimes we tend to over-exaggerate toward the negative side, even if that's not the intention of what we were trying to do. So I could see this being something that's getting blown up a bit more than it should be. But I did see a post earlier saying, what if Sony basically told Bungie that they were going to hire new people to run Destiny 2 and everything, and basically it was just Bungie in name only? How would you feel? And Chris, you and I have had a few conversations about the show of, like, when you're listening to people talk about developers that they love, like the Naughty Dog that I fell in love with in 1997, 1998, whatever it was, when I'm sitting there playing Crash Bandicoot 1, is not the same Naughty Dog today. Like, I may still love Naughty Dog, but they're not the same Naughty Dog. That's just the reality of development. So with that in mind, what do you think? Do you think we could see a story of Bungie going from being owned to independent to owned to independent again?
No, I think Bungie's in over their heads. I think it's either Sony keeps them alive or Sony shuts them down. I think it all rests on
this is a real
shape.
question of, what is the cachet of name? Like, at what point is it worth Sony having Bungie just so they have the ability to say this is a Bungie game? Like, we just talked about the fact that we're aware that Naughty Dog is not the same Naughty Dog they were. But is that as intuitive and obvious to the more everyday average consumer who will just go, oh shit, I love Bungie games?
No. It won't matter to the average person until they play the game.
Yeah,
but I think it depends. Like, do you think Bungie's magic comes from Pete Parsons or the people Pete Parsons and his team trained?
Yeah.
Right, because it sounds like the problem in talking to Sean, who loves Destiny and just reading the internet, it sounds like the problem is the upper management. So quite honestly, I hope that Sony takes them over, gets rid of the fat, and moves forward. Maybe it's makes Destiny or Bungie a worse studio, but maybe it makes them better. Maybe they go, hey, we're not going to be a Destiny factory or anything like that. So,
which I think it seems pretty clear that they don't necessarily want to be a Destiny factory forever, and I think that's why we're finally seeing like, hey, we're bringing back. I cannot for the life of me think of the Marathon. Yeah, we're bringing back Marathon, an IP we haven't touched in fucking 25 years. You know, we're bringing that back. Ooh, we're bringing back, or hell, maybe even 30 years since they've made that. Point being is that, and then this Matter game, as far as we know, like if you look at all that, I think it's clear that they want to get away from at least Destiny. Now, whether or not that means they'll be getting away from live service or not remains to be seen. There's a very clear, easy way for these other two games to still be live service like you expect from Bungie these days. But yeah, I guess the question is if Destiny is winding down and if the final shape really is kind of like them kind of being like, this is our last big push with Destiny, and then we'll support the game the way we have for a long time, but it's going to be more like back-end support. Like we'll do a season, we'll have a little bit of season content, but it's just going to be in service of rounding out the game, and then we'll just keep it alive with weeklies that we rotate around through, and maybe we'll rotate which raids are available or which nightfalls are available, but we're not going to be adding new content in the same way we were because we're pushing towards our next games. And if that's the case, this would actually be the right time to be like, yeah, we're shaking up Bungie right now. Because like Destiny has a feel and expectations that are set from it, but these other two games don't. So if you bring in new people and you make a different game, the expectations are, no one has an expectation of Marathon. No one knows what the fuck that game's going to be. It's not going to be Destiny. So who does it matter if someone new made it? So I think in that sense, I think Sony would try and salvage the name and just, keep as many of the talented people they can there, and just anybody who's higher up that's not benefiting towards what they're doing might get shaken up. But I don't inherently view that as a bad thing, in all honesty. I think sometimes big developers like Bungie, even when they were independent, they need to be shaken up a little bit.
True.
So, but it's an interesting thought process because do you think Sony does regret the purchase, or do 100%. You think Sony's just...
Not even a question on my mind.
Why? Do you think it's just because Bungie hasn't really netted out in the benefits of... It seems pretty obvious to everyone that they bought Bungie for their live service know-how. Do you think that just hasn't paid off as much as they expected it to?
I don't think you buy a company you expect to miss their revenue targets by 45%. So just all other factors notwithstanding, they regret it strictly off that.
Fair. You know what makes these conversations really complicated is how much tax law that I do not understand. Because the reality is like, them canceling, whether or not Bungie had anything to do with it, Sony canceling factions, or what was apparently going to be called The Last of Us Online, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much of that do they just get to write off in unpaid taxes?
All of it. It's not seeing the light of day.
Well, what I mean by that is that they spent the money, but the question is like they don't get literally all that money back, but they get a percentage of it back from what they won't have to pay in taxes. So in a weird way, it's like getting that. But I think it's like 40%. So the question is they must have realized that getting 40% of what they invested into it was going to be more likely than what they were likely to get from putting it out.
Yeah. That's definitely.
And so true. At what point can you buy Bungie and just be like, yeah, we're going to lose money on them, but it's tax write-off?
I don't know that it works the same way.
I don't either. That's what I'm saying. I don't know enough about taxes, but it does make you wonder what can be said of, I don't know if you can tax write off Bungie losing money as much as you can write off a project that Bungie was working on being shuttered and being like, hey, all the money we invested into that project now is going to be able to be, written off.
And I'd wonder if it's like, because I think the money vests in 26. So if they shut it down in 25 and they're like, we're not paying you out, your studio doesn't exist, there's money saved.
I don't know. Do you think as we've seen a lot of companies start breaking off towards being independent after being bought, Sabre was only, relatively recently bought by Embracer and now is once again going back to being independent. It sounds kind of like a crazy thing, but I could see Bungie, if they can manage to find somebody who wanted to invest in them in that capacity, going back to being independent or at least separate from Sony. You know what I mean? What would the craziest power move be? Microsoft knocking at their door one more time and being like, hey, remember us?
I'm sorry. I just think they were the articles around the time of the layoffs were basically that Bungie might not have survived had Sony not bought them. I don't see why anyone else is coming to knock on the doors when Bungie is clearly doing worse. Bungie is either going to die, be shaken up, or left alone. It's going to be one of those three, but they can't go independent. They clearly can't. They don't have any money. It's just Sony's stuck with Bungie, and they're going to have to figure it out. I think it's just that simple. Like, no one's going to come in and take it off their hands. Again, they missed revenue by 45%. That is business shutdown territory, and they're lucky that they have Sony backing them. So I think the only thing you can hope for Bungie is that Final Shape is good. Whatever this dumbass next season is good, and whatever Marathon is good. They've already canceled Matter, so it's all on Marathon. So I hope it's good, and I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see how Final Shape does, and hopefully Final Shape does well. But I know that there's a lot of scuttlebutt that once Final Shape comes out, they're due for more layoffs. So at that point, it's like Sony's got to step in and be like, we gave you billions of dollars to keep these people. Why don't you guys as leadership get the fuck out of here? We'll put people who know what they're doing in charge and move forward.
Let me also, okay, this is a conversation that I understand is moderately uncomfortable because it's dealing with the reality of people's livelihood and their income. But I think there's a really real conversation to be had, or at least something to consider, that a lot of these tech companies are bloated for no real reason. And when you look at this and you kind of go like, well, they have all these employees, but I'm not saying this was nice or this was anything, but I'm going to be honest to my experience with the platform. Twitter got bought by Elon Musk. Elon Musk fired like 70% of the workforce, and I have not really noticed a difference in how Twitter works for me. And I think that clearly shows that there was a large number of people who were redundant and not necessary at all to make Twitter function. And one of the things we kind of get used to is this idea, well, there should be more jobs. And that would be great, right? But the reality is if having those more jobs comes at the risk of constantly having to slash them in order to keep your budgets right, because deep down you really know that you can make Destiny with way less people than you chose to hire, then it's a matter of eventually those costs are going to have to get cut. Even if they start trying to hire in other people to keep jobs up for PR or for what they think they actually need, I think that there's a decent argument to say that Twitter not completely burning to the ground, quite literally at a functional level, does indicate, and I'm going to be honest to a degree, I think that there's... I work for a company, my immediate company. I have a parent company, but my immediate company, I think we have like 12 employees. I'll be dead honest with you. I'm pretty sure you could fire 3 or 4 of our employees and nothing would change. I'd be 100% with you. If everyone else actually worked the rest of the day like they realistically should be, I don't think that you'd see much of a change. And that's a conversation people do not like to have, but it's a reality of a lot of workspaces, definitely office spaces. I think your industry is a little different, Chris, because like it's a little more service based and it's based around the amount of work that's coming in from the demand. And so there's an idea that if there's not much demand going on right now, you cut the workers and send them home early if they need to, or that they're just not having anything to do. Whereas my business is very different. There can be large sections of a day where I don't have anything to do. It's not really the case for me very often because of my position, but the position I had prior to this, that was the case sometimes. And I'd just be sitting at my desk for 3 hours fucking around. And there was times where I was like, they don't really need to pay me for that, but there's also, they need someone to do the parts that need to be done. So you're caught in this weird thing where it's like, maybe they could just restructure and have a more efficient setup. And I think that's what's happening in the industry. And is that uncomfortable and unfortunate? And are people losing their jobs? Yes. But I think the vast majority of those people are probably people who didn't really contribute enough of value for them to be noticeable if we were to really try and look. Still sucks. A lot of people lost their job. Why did that place hire that many people if they didn't really need it? That's the question. I'm not really trying to chastise the individual so much as I'm chastising the company for having a work environment and where that many people can be there and not add value to the company.
No, definitely.
So, all right, we've got a couple of technical issues happening on our side. So we're going to cut the episode a little shorter than what we were going to do. That means that the Velvet's Corner we had planned is going to get cut. Probably one of the questions is going to get cut. But we appreciate everybody who sent them in. Hopefully we'll do them next week. But with that in mind, we're going to try and at least round up the couple of topics we didn't quite land on and nail. I feel pretty good about the discussion around Bungie. So that really leaves one primary topic and then a question that's kind of in line with it. And that is around what we've often talk about, these rumors kind of stirring around a PS5 Pro. Now we have far more evidence of it, so it seems unlikely that it's not real. More importantly, we have specs for it, and they come from a reputable source, being backed by YouTuber Moore's Law is Dead. So with that in mind, we are going to quickly talk about some of the stuff that's going on here. So I'm over on Eurogamer, who are the people behind Digital Foundry. So Richard Ledbetter has a article on this, and he's talking about it. And I think there's actually a video up on it as well. So they're talking about the technical specifications of the PlayStation 5 Pro. Says the machine is real. It's coming relatively soon, seemingly holiday 2024. And by and large, the leaks are accurate. The question is, what are the design objectives of the new console? What is less than ideal about the current PS5, and how will the Pro model address those issues? We're on the record of saying that this generation doesn't really need a mid-gen upgrade, but does the state of recent games and extra power and capabilities of the mooted Pro change our opinion? So they go back in to say that they seem to think that the leaks themselves are accurate. There's no reason to think otherwise. And now we start getting into kind of the meat and potatoes, if you want to call it that. So there are numbers that are not really going to matter to certain people. So really the thing to go in through here is that you can look at what the actual GPU is claiming. So the GPU is supposed to be moving from 36 CUs, which is computational units, on RDNA 2 to 60 CUs on RDNA 3. Basically, it just means way more teraflops. The numbers that everybody gave too much of a shit about whenever the PS4 and Xbox One were coming out, and they were like, "Ooh, teraflops," a word I'd never heard until those systems. I don't know if you remember that, Chris. It's a wild time in the gaming frontier online. So, and a couple other things happen there. There is going to be still 16 gigabytes of RAM, GDR6, but moving from 14 gigabytes per second push-through rate to being able to do 18 gigabytes per second, or gigabits per second, if we're being accurate with our terminology. And the memory available of that 16 gigs will move up from 12.5 gigabytes on the PlayStation 5 to 13.7 on the PS5 Pro. And then lastly, a pretty modest improvement to around a 10% upgrade to the CPU itself. So this is another one of those things where a lot of the jumps are going to be happening on the GPU side. Now that can get interesting because, Chris, I think you'd be fair to say too, a big conversation point this generation has been that too many games are still 30 frames per second. And I think that this is kind of let me backpedal there. I think a lot of people speak and say too many games are 30 frames per second. What I think they really mean is that they don't want to give up the resolution boost to hit 60 frames per second because they either view that resolution as too low, too dynamic, to where it constantly dips too low, or that even though it hits 60 frames per second, it's not doing it consistently enough to want to not have the rock solid 30. I think those are two different things. But I think if anybody, there's a real question here. If I was looking at Sony and the PS5 and I was looking at what I actually wanted to move up here, I think the biggest thing you'd want to look at is go, okay, frames per second has become way more of a topic this generation. Even me, someone who last generation pretty much didn't care if it was 60 frames per second, but always said, like, I do understand that 60 frames per second feels better. I play PC sometimes. I am so used to playing at 60 frames per second now, I don't give a shit what graphical hits I have to take. I don't care. I'm playing the game at 60 frames per second. I played Final Fantasy 16 at 60 frames per second. It felt incredible. It was worth it. Was it always a 100% 60? No, but it was close enough, often enough that the feel alone was a big thing. But Chris, I want to get your thoughts on this. It's a little hard to describe. But for what a game usually loses in pure graphical fidelity and maybe even some of the ability to do certain particle effects, so that may make it look better in an objective sense, I think in a weirdly hard to convey sense, 60 frames per second, sometimes, even though it took a resolution dip, looks more realistic to me. It looks better to me. And I don't know how to describe that, but the game looks better by being smoother.
No, I completely agree with that. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I've seen that multiple times just being the case.
Like, okay, I think it was around the time that you came down, because we were talking about, and Saul actually was talking about as well. I piddled around with playing Horizon Forbidden West in both the 30 frames per second mode and the 60. And I kind of bounced back and forth through them throughout the whole game, because the 60 frames per second mode did have this really weird, like, glimmering effect on a lot of the stuff if you were playing in 60. So it felt great and it mostly looked better. But the difference is that since it actually added like a shining artifact to the edge of almost everything in the game, it was notably bad. And so playing at 30 frames per second dealt with all that, but the game felt worse. But that's the only game I've actually had that problem, where the graphical hit was so obvious because of something it introduced, rather than just being like, yeah, this isn't 4K, but it's 1080p and it looks great, and somehow it looks better because it's smoother. So I would say, if I'm looking at anything, right, there's a question I think that comes down to what is the Ryan? Why can't I think of his name? Dude from IGN, big Xbox person, talks about PSVR 2, Ryan McCaffrey. I saw him on Twitter today being like, if PS5 Pro is real, who's it for? And he was talking about that. And I think there's a real question to be asked. Xbox seems to be skipping the mid-gen refresh. It doesn't help that they're considerably losing the console war, and I think that they've just kind of realized that, and why invest in a niche product? Because the answer to Ryan's question is that it's for the niche part of the market that want it and will pay for it.
Right.
If anyone remembers PS4 Pro numbers, Chris, they weren't high.
Yeah, it was like 20 million.
Nor were Series X numbers. They were pretty low in the general percentage of the console. If you were to take the entirety of PS4 sales and look at what percentage of them were PS4 Pro, it's pretty low. It might even have been 10 million. But that's still 10 million units that they didn't really sell at a loss. And there was a corner of the market that wanted it, and it was people. It was something that made people who might have considered going to computer or elsewhere stay on PlayStation, and that was the goal of it. So with that in mind, thinking about being able to hit frame rates more consistently, one of the things that's weird about this is that they're doing their own version of essentially AI upscaled resolution. This is something that we've seen from NVIDIA with DLSS, which is deep learning super sampling, which is just AI upscaling. It's not too far from what you're seeing with FSR, which is whatever super resolution from AMD. And with those things in mind, we've had this conversation a little bit, Chris, but there's been a few times where I've played the game and I'm like, I don't really know that games really need to look markedly better than this. And if I'm really going to look and point at it, I don't know what game is really going to not have 4K better. Like 4K as the max resolution seems like, why would you ever try? And yet one of the things that this leak talks about is the ability to do 8K.
Yeah.
And that's where I really do start to draw the line. As I can see 10% of PS5 users wanting this premium experience for 4K 60 frames per second, where you're not having to give one up. The 0.01% of the population is going to benefit from 8K. Why the fuck are you even using that as a marketing leg? If that's actually how they're going to market it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. It's marketing. To me, if it says it does 8K, it would say to me, okay, I don't have to worry about 4K 60.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I can do, I can technically run a marathon. That doesn't mean I'm ever going to, like, and that's the thing with this.
Sure, it's kind of like how PS3 was supposed to be an HD console, full HD, but a very small selection of its actual library really ran at 1080p.
I remember when PS5 was coming out, there was one game that was running in 8K, and they talked a bunch about it, but then you looked at the game and it was a pixel art game. And I'm not disparaging pixel art, but you're not selling me on the future of 8K with fucking Castlevania. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what I think they did. To me, it's just putting something on the box that sounds better than 4K to make people who don't know what's going on go, oh, this is future proofed. And it's that simple.
Well, and that's what I think is kind of wild, because like I don't know if you remember actually seeing a good example of your argument, right? Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown on PS5 ran at 4K 120 frames per second.
Yeah.
If you had a TV that could show you the 120 frames. If not, it just subdivided down to 60. And with that in mind, it's like that game looked incredible. It did. But that's not trying to be a graphical showcase, so it doesn't really matter in that sense. Like, I'm glad it did run at 120 frames per second. My TV could handle it. The game was incredibly smooth, and it made a really big difference for the fighting mechanics. But are you getting that out of The Last of Us Part 2? Not really.
No. And does it? And that's the same question you asked: is does it matter? And the answer is no. I would take worse looking games made faster every time.
Well, that's kind of what I go to. I think that if you look at what the majority of even people online who are really probably closer to the target market for a pro console to begin with, people who like the gaming enough to want to interact with it online in those spheres. So when you look at that, there's a really big downside. As Blake noted, the 10% roughly increase to the CPU is not going to do a whole lot. It's not going to suddenly make games that were 30 frames per second titles, which, by the way, there's very few. I want to make that known. There's a dude who, I believe this, I haven't checked out the thing past that, but there's a guy who said of like the 14 or I think it was like 4,000 games that have been released on PS5, which is a different topic. Can't believe it's already gotten there. Most of those are shovelware. But of those, only like 4 to 8, it's like less than 10 run with an only 30 frames per second mode. And we're 3 years coming into 4 years or so into the generation. That's not bad. That's pretty good, actually. So all those other games at least have a 60 frames per second option. And it's running at something higher than 30 frames per second. But for a game that is 30 frames per second, because the CPU was the limiting factor, this is not going to move that at all. Now, if it was limited factor because of the GPU, which sometimes is the case, a lot of people don't realize that GPU can also play into what your frame rate's going to be. Then, yeah, games that are GPU limited will see a big benefit from this. Games that are CPU limited will have a easier time having a more solidly locked 30 frames per second. That's about all you're going to get out of it. So it does bring the question of, no one quite knows what the cost of this device is going to be. But Chris, I ask you as somebody who I think would, and I know myself would, I am very likely to buy a PS5 Pro because I do like the extra power. But there's an extra wrinkle into this that I think is important to say. So before we start talking about what we think the price and everything is, we've talked a few times this year. I said, like, I don't know that games need to look much better than Lies of P. It's a great looking game. And if we're being really honest, if you want to go towards photorealistic visuals, I don't think a game needs to look better than Last of Us Part 2. Say what you will about any other part of that game, I don't really care. If you look at The Last of Us Part 2 and don't go, holy shit, that looks incredible, it does. Do games really need to look better than that? Like, I'm being serious. I don't see it. And so I start to look at this and I look at the things that do matter here and where you can make notable changes, not just pushing a resolution further up a thing that most people can't really see the difference on. And I think about like ray tracing. Ray tracing is a market improvement. Any game that has ray tracing and you can turn it on and off between them, it's noticeable. It makes a huge difference. So being able to have higher quality ray tracing and ray tracing more often in these games on Pro is something I think is cool. This is a way that you can help push graphics forward without having to just be a race towards the top of fidelity. Instead, it's look at what we can do with light bounces now. Look how we can make light look more realistic with something that's computationally oriented. So it shouldn't add a whole lot of man hours to game development. If anything, it should make it easier. If you can hit ray tracing without having to do baked in lighting, it shouldn't be a problem conceptually. So kind of coupling in on that, Chris, I think it's fair to say you'd buy this.
I would. I think so. I would buy it strictly for the 4K 60 FPS.
If they can get that.
Yeah, because that's one
What
of
if
those
they can't? Would you still buy it? What if it's more often you get games that are 4K 60, but not every time?
I don't know. Maybe it's because like you could make an argument that my primary console is the PS3 right now.
Sure.
I don't want to play games at 30 FPS, but I can tell you that I downloaded and played some Gotham Knights recently and didn't notice.
Sure.
Because for me, it's seeing it. So like you brought up when I was down there and we were playing Horizon, I remember the one thing I said to you was I don't want to see it in 60. Because I was planning on playing it in 30 because it looked insane. And I was like, I don't want to see it in 60. So I don't even think we played it because I was like, I can't see it. Because if I see it, I can't play it in 30. So that's kind of the way it is, you know. I started, there was something else I was playing in 30 and I'm like, this is not ideal, but it was Final Fantasy VII, Rebirth. Remake, because I knew that the best way to play 7 was in 30 FPS. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to play this in 30 FPS. But I couldn't do it.
That means on Rebirth, you're going to be playing at 30. Or did you finally swap to the 60?
No, I swapped to 60 in Remake. But I'm going to try and play Rebirth there. We'll see. But for me, it's just... I can't see 60 FPS. Once I see it,
and go backwards,
then I can't go backwards.
Yeah.
So...
Well, we got a question from Jehudi, and I think that this adds an extra wrinkle because I'll go ahead and tell you, I just talked about how I have enough expendable income to be able to make $500, quick off the cusp, purchases. So for me, I would buy one, but it does still add into this thing of Jehudi asks, speaking about PS5 Pro, what price would you say, nope, not for me? And what price would you be comfortable with? And keeping that in mind, you said that if it couldn't consistently hit 4K 60 on everything, and that's no longer the selling point, at what price point do you go, even the rest of the benefits just aren't worth it? 600?
Yeah. If it doesn't, we're saying if it doesn't do 4K 60?
If it doesn't do 4K 60 for pretty much every game, then yeah. Or at least most, 90% of it. Let's say, because I think it's unfair to say for every game. That's a developer. If the developer's not very good, they're not going to get there. But let's say 90% of titles are, that would be the question. If it's not going to have it to where at least 90% titles are hitting 4K 60 consistently, what price would you go? At this price point, I no longer care.
Yeah,
is it if it breaks 600 or is if it hits 600? Like if they go, here's PS5 Pro, it's 600.
I think I would buy it. But it's a hard question to answer without all the facts. Because if you told me, because right now Dragon's Dogma, basically, I'm looking forward to playing that and it runs at 30.
Mm-hmm.
If the selling point was, hey, Gotham Knights is getting a PS5 Pro patch at 60. Dragon's Dogma, capped 60. That would be a situation where I would consider it more. But if it was like, hey, most games will do 4K 60, but some of them won't, and we can't tell you anything to make you feel better about this. And at that point, it would be like, I'm not going to buy this because that sounds like the PS5 with extra steps. If not everything can do 4K 60, then what's the point? I know that most things don't do 4K 60 now, but what am I spending $600 for? Probably maximum 3 years away from the next console cycle to not get 4K 60 on everything. What's the purpose?
So let me ask you this, because I think this kind of goes more into what we're actually seeing on the market. So if you look between right now, it's either 4K 30, and sometimes it's not even true 4K, but it still outputs at 4K. But it's a lot closer to 4K, if not 4K. The question a lot of people are, I've seen a few people, Kiki, and I've seen other people talk about how they play at 30 frames per second because the resolution is too low. the drop in resolution from 4K is too low to want to benefit from the 60. And that is true in some games, right? Like some games have dynamic resolution scaling to where like at their highest resolution at 60 frames per second, it can sometimes hit like 1440p. And then the lowest it can hit sometimes like 720p in order to make sure it keeps that rock solid 60 or as close to it as it can. Let's say that what happened here is it moves forward and they go, listen, 4K 60 is still just a really hard thing to get consistently with the way games are made in technology. But what we can say is that when you're playing a 60 frames per second mode, no longer are you going to be looking at 1080p or 1280p or 1299p or 1440p. Instead, we can do pretty consistently. We can promise that 90% of games on the market are going to be able to hit 1800p at 60 frames per second, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, 4K is 2160p. So that gives you kind of an idea of how far off it is from that. Do you think that there's a certain threshold where they can just explain to you, like, listen, we can still get you a lot closer to a 4K crisp image while still getting you the benefit of 60 frames per second, even if we can't get native true 4K? Do you think that there's a resolution at which you can go, I am comfortable with that. I do like that. And I think the way to show that would be, right, go to a game that does have an extremely low dynamic resolution. I think Rebirth can actually be a really good example here because sometimes Rebirth looks kind of rough in 60 frames per second. Most of the time it's tied to lighting. But if you can show me a game like Rebirth in 60 frames per second, and you can show me what it looks like on PS5 at 60 frames, but then you can show me what it looks like on PS5 Pro, and I can see how much more consistently it looks crisp, I might go, okay, that's worth it. That's worth it to me.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, sounding the way you're talking, what you're mentioning, it doesn't sound like something I'd be interested in. Like what we're talking about.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would have to be a 4K 60 machine. Otherwise, I'll just wait for next gen.
So the wrinkle we haven't quite gotten into here is that the way that they seem to be, and I think this is how they're going to sell it. Do you remember how the PS4 Pro they sold it as a 4K machine, even though it never actually did true 4K except for like a couple of sports games?
Yeah, like the checkerboarding or whatever.
Yeah, it was temporal upscaling or whatever like that, where you use the checkerboard thing. So what they're talking about doing here and doing AI upscaling, we kind of already see a version of that in games with FSR being part of AMD's chipset. But it looks like Sony's developing their own in-house version, which is closer to the efficiency of DLSS, which pretty much everyone in the industry agrees gives far better upscaling results than FSR. And to the degree that a lot of people say running a game, with DLSS set to 4K where it's really 1800p, but it's dynamically AI upscaling. It's where it looks almost indistinguishable from 4K and it can still do 60 frames per second. Is that enough of the push of like, yeah, it may not be doing native 4K, but it's getting there with reprojection or whatever you want to call it, upscaling that I can't tell a visible difference from? Do you care enough to be like, no, I'm a pure numbers person? Or if it looks the same, are you like, great, we're good?
It looks the same, and we're good.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of graphics card do you run on your computer? I know your computer's kind of bogged down these days, but for a bit you spent money on a good computer, and I'm sure you played around with how hard you could push your card, right?
I did, yeah. It's a 2070 Ti, I believe.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, card, not bad. Yeah. So did you ever I think that's a DLSS enabled card. Did you ever fuck around with DLSS to see the difference it made?
Not really, no. I think if it was on, I left it on, but I never I didn't play enough games that I needed to switch it. It was like Red Dead, just max everything out and go. But yeah, I never got too into the minutia on PS5 or PC. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at. If they can come up with a close enough, we're running at 1800p and upscaling to hit 4K 60, I'm good with that. And then on top of that, you're getting 2 times the resolution in your ray tracing, even at 60 frames per second. Hell yeah, that's awesome. I have enough income that I'll be like, yeah, I'd rather pay for that. But I think it's pretty clear to say like that power is not needed.
Yeah, this is one of those purchases where it's either like they sold me day one, or it's one of those things where it's like, oh, it's here. It'll depend, because that's how you'll get me to buy a second Portal is, oh shit, it's here at Best Buy. Fuck. All right, let's do it. So with this, it'll either be a you got me day one, or you'll wear me down until I end up picking it up, or I won't pick it up at all because it's not worth it. It's one of the three. I know that's a very lame answer, but
no, I mean, I get you. I think, like you said, it's if they get you day one, it's all about how well they've marketed what they're making to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Going back to price for me, just to finally kind of, I guess, put a close on that question. The price I expect and the price that I imagine we'll get, even with all these, definitely since the CPU is not seeing a big jump as I thought. If the CPU saw a big jump and it was clear that it was going to be something that could do native 4K 60, which is really hard to do, by the way, just throwing that out there, then I could see myself maybe even being comfortable in 650 or 700. But I'm with Chris. My expectation for this device is it's probably going to be $600. It would be awesome if it did what PS4 Pro did, and then go, hey, this is a $500 machine that we've just made far more efficient. And now the original, if you just want a normal PS5, it's $400 or it's $350 or whatever it be. So, it's a matter of what Sony wants to do. But if they move the disc PS5 down to $400 and the digital PS5 down to $350, and they have the PS5 Pro at the $500 spot, maybe even $550 spot, I think the fact that they were willing to do $550 instead of $500 for PSVR 2 shows that they don't mind half stepping. So
yeah, we'll see, man. I'm interested in this product. Whether I buy it or not is a whole other question.
Chris is just going to sell his PSVR 2 to pay for his PS5 Pro.
Not a bad idea.
So there we have it. All right, Chris. Well, thanks for sticking with me through the pain and through the PC problems that we had there, the little bit of tech problems. But with that in mind, we're going to wrap this show up. Don't worry, we will get to the questions and Velvet's Corner that we had planned. Rude Cold, you have not been, or rather Rude Days 93, you've not been forgotten. Rude Cold, you haven't been forgotten either. Hope you're doing well. But we're going to round the show off like we always do by reminding you that if you want to interact with us and answer things like the community's take and whatnot, you can head over to our social media on Twitter at Triangle SQRD. You can find us in the link below, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcast services. Click into that description, find the Discord link, join there. That's where you can talk to us as well as a lot of our listeners, many of whom are our patrons, and can discuss things like the show, like games that you're excited for coming out. You can participate in our trophy competition, which is going on and still going strong, or you can just hop in and give us feedback on things that we said at the podcast, what you agree with, what you don't agree with, maybe add your own context to things. We'd love to see you there. But as a final shout out, what we always do for our patrons who went over to patreon.com/NardsHeck and gave as little as $1 per month for the show to help support us, we give them a shout out at the end of episode. And there's a new one this week coming back around after having a lap subscription in the past, Mr. Matt Tubbs. Matt, thank you so much for resubscribing. We appreciate you. We are so thankful that you see the value in coming back to the show. Hopefully you've been listening this whole time and you just got in a position where you felt like you were able to do this or whatever it is. We're appreciative of it. And with that in mind, we're going to thank the rest of them in Duh Overlord, Spencer, Brandon Edwards, Alex, Barry Rogers, Stingray X, Easton 328, Aztec King, Lechion 69, The Lord Corgi, Bailey Robertson, Mark Schutz, Cypher Primus, Kyle Grimm, Rude Days 93, Kevin Bacon Bits, Danny Villiobos, Jehudi MD, No Fate, Josh Ayers, Derek Porter, Donovan Williams, Matthew Green, and Sean Sanderud. Thanks to each and every one of you. See you next week.